They don't tell new rangers about the footprints at Olympic National Forest, the ones that appear overnight, always in pairs, always leading toward the ocean and never coming back. I followed them twice. I won't discuss what I found. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been stationed at Olympic National Forest for 7 years, long enough to know that some protocols exist not because of policy, but because of things that happened before I arrived. Things that the senior rangers refused to discuss in detail, speaking only in coded warnings and meaningful silences. The footprints were one of those things. The missing hikers were another, and the rule about never patrolling alone after dark was a third. I learned about the footprints during my first week from a ranger named Tom Blackwatcher. He was Quileute, born and raised near the reservation, and he knew these forests in ways the rest of us never would. His family had been here for generations, long before it became a national forest, back when different rules governed these woods. Tom was in his 50s, lean and weathered, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. The other rangers called him Blackwatcher because of the way he would stand at the forest edge at dusk, watching the tree line like he was waiting for something to emerge. He never explained what he was looking for, and no one asked. "Don't follow the footprints if you see them," Tom told me one evening as we finished our patrol route. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red through the massive Douglas firs. "And if you do see them, report the location immediately. Don't investigate. Don't take photographs. Just mark the GPS coordinates and radio it in." "What makes these footprints special?" I asked, thinking he meant bear tracks or maybe evidence of poachers. Tom looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "They're not special. They're wrong. Human-shaped, barefoot, always in pairs, always heading west toward the ocean. You'll know them when you see them because everything in you will tell you not to follow them. Listen to that voice. But what made them? Something that walks like a man but isn't one. Something that wears stolen skins and stolen faces. The old people have names for it, but using those names gives it power. So we don't. We just stay away from the footprints and hope it stays away from us." I thought he was hazing me, telling ghost stories to spook the new guy. Olympic National Forest was vast, nearly 1 million acres of wilderness, and people got lost or hurt all the time. Easy to develop superstitions in a place this remote and unforgiving. But Tom didn't smile or laugh. He just returned to watching the darkening forest with that patient, wary intensity that gave him his nickname. 2 days later, I saw the footprints for the first time. I was doing a routine trail inspection near the Hoh River, checking for fallen trees or erosion that might need repair. It was mid-morning, the forest quiet except for the river's distant rush and the occasional bird call. The trail was well maintained here, popular with tourists wanting to see the old-growth rainforest. I walked slowly, taking notes on my clipboard, marking locations that would need attention. Then I rounded a bend and stopped. The footprints were in the mud beside the trail, where water from the previous night's rain had pooled in a depression. 2 sets, side by side, pressed deep into the soft earth. They were barefoot, human-shaped, but something about them made my skin crawl. The toes were too long, the arch too pronounced, and the stride length between prints was impossibly long, at least 5 feet between steps. They led off the trail, heading west through the dense undergrowth toward the coast 15 miles away. I stood there staring at them, feeling that warning Tom had mentioned rising up inside me. Every instinct I had screamed at me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. The forest had gone silent around me. No birds, no insects, just the distant river and my own breathing, suddenly too loud in the stillness. I pulled out my GPS unit and marked the coordinates. My hands were shaking. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Webb. I have a code 47 at my location. GPS coordinates to follow." Code 47. We all knew what it meant, even though it wasn't in any official manual. Strange footprints heading west. The rangers who had been here long enough had insisted on having a code for it, a way to report it without saying what it was over the open radio channel. "Copy that, Webb." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. She sounded tense. "Transmit coordinates and return to base immediately. Do not investigate further." I sent the coordinates and backed away from the footprints, never taking my eyes off them until I was around the bend and out of sight. Then I walked quickly back to my vehicle, trying not to run, but wanting desperately to put distance between myself and whatever had made those tracks. That night, Tom found me in the ranger station break room. I was drinking coffee, trying to settle my nerves, though it was already past 10 and the caffeine was the last thing I needed. "You saw them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, near the Ho River Trail. They were fresh, maybe from last night." Tom nodded slowly, pulling up a chair across from me. "You did the right thing, reporting and walking away." "What are they, Tom? Really? Not folklore, not stories. What actually makes those tracks?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant only for me. "My grandmother called it a skinwalker. Different tribes have different names, but the concept is the same. It's something that used to be human, or something that learned to mimic humans. It wears skins like clothes, takes on the shape of animals or people, but it's never quite right. The proportions are off, the movements are wrong, and it leaves those tracks because even when it looks human, it's not. Not anymore." "That's impossible." "Is it? You saw the tracks. You felt it, didn't you? That wrongness, that certainty that you should run." I couldn't argue with that. I had felt it. That primal fear, older than language, the kind of terror that had kept our ancestors alive in the dark. "Why does it walk toward the ocean?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe it's going home. Maybe it's hunting. Maybe it's just following some instinct we don't understand. But it's been doing it for as long as anyone can remember, long before this was a national park. The old people knew to stay away from the tracks, to never follow them. Some things in these forests are older than our understanding. We share this land with them, but we're not the dominant species here. We're just visitors who forgot to be respectful." Over the next few months, I settled into the rhythm of ranger work in Olympic. The forest became familiar, comfortable even, though I never forgot Tom's warning. I learned the trails, memorized the terrain, built relationships with my fellow rangers. There was Helen Zhang, who everyone called Silent Ranger because she could move through the forest without making a sound. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, but she'd been a Marine before joining the Park Service and had a toughness that belied her size. She knew tracking, survival, and could read the forest like a book. Then there was Derek Stone, Iron Warden, a massive man who'd worked in logging before realizing he loved the forests more than cutting them down. He was strong enough to carry injured hikers out single-handedly and had done so more than once. Despite his size, he was gentle and patient, especially with tourists who got in over their heads on difficult trails. The three of us, along with Tom and a few others, formed the core team for the deep forest patrols. We were the ones who went into the backcountry for days at a time, checking on the remote areas where casual visitors never ventured. And it was during those patrols that I began to understand the forest held more secrets than just the footprints. There were the sounds at night, for instance, calls that echoed through the darkness, almost human but not quite, screams that might have been mountain lions or might have been something else. Helen heard them too and would lie awake in her tent, listening, her hand on the knife she kept by her sleeping bag. "It's testing us," she said one night after a particularly loud series of calls had echoed through our camp. "Seeing if we'll respond, if we'll investigate. The smart thing is to stay put and wait for daylight." "You think it's the same thing that makes the footprints?" I asked. "I think there are things in these woods that we don't have names for. Things that don't fit into our neat categories of animal or human. And I think they know we're here. They tolerate us, mostly. But that tolerance has limits." Derek, who'd been keeping watch, grunted in agreement. "I've seen things. Not clearly. Just movement in the corner of my eye. Shapes that don't match any animal I know. Could be nothing. Could be lack of sleep playing tricks. But out here, you learn to trust your gut. And my gut says there's something in these forests that doesn't want us looking too closely." The three of us became known as the Deep Forest Team. When there was a difficult rescue or a report of something unusual in the backcountry, we were the ones who got called. We trusted each other with our lives, which was essential in a place as dangerous as Olympic. The forest could kill you in 100 different ways if you weren't careful, and even if you were careful, bad luck could still get you. Hypothermia, falls, wild animals, flash floods. We'd all seen death out here, pulled bodies from ravines and rivers, told families their loved ones weren't coming home. But those were natural deaths, explicable tragedies. What we started encountering in my second year was something else entirely. It started with the Hendersons. They were a family from Seattle, parents in their 40s with 2 teenage kids, doing a 3-day backpacking trip on the North Fork Salt Duck Trail. They'd registered their itinerary with the ranger station, experienced hikers who knew what they were doing. When they didn't check in at the end of their trip, we gave them an extra day, thinking they'd gotten delayed. When they still didn't show up, we organized a search. Helen, Derek, Tom, and I headed up the trail they'd taken, moving fast, calling their names. We found their camp on the second day, deep in the backcountry near a stream. The tents were still standing, gear neatly arranged. The fire pit was cold, but looked like it had been used the night before. Everything was normal, except for one thing. The family was gone. Not packed up and moved on. Just gone. Their sleeping bags were still in the tents. Their food was still hanging from the bear line. Their boots were lined up outside their tents. But no people, no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing. "This doesn't make sense," Derek said, examining the camp. "Why would they leave without their gear, without their boots?" Helen was studying the ground around the campsite, her face grim. "Look at this." We gathered around where she was crouching. There in the soft earth were footprints, barefoot, human-shaped, but wrong, just like the ones Tom had warned me about. They circled the entire campsite, dozens of them, all heading off into the forest toward the west. "How many?" I asked. Helen shook her head. "At least 6 sets, maybe more. They were here all night from the look of it, walking around the camp in circles." Tom had gone pale. "We need to call this in, get more people out here, and we need to leave. Now." "We can't abandon the search," Derek protested. "That family is out there somewhere." "They're gone," Tom said flatly. "They followed the tracks, or they were taken. Either way, we won't find them, not alive." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Tom's voice was hard, brooking no argument. "I've seen this before, twice. Once when I was a kid, a hunting party that vanished. Once about 10 years ago, a couple on their honeymoon. Same thing. Camp intact, footprints circling, people gone. We never found bodies. We never found anything except those goddamn footprints leading west. We searched anyway, of course. Had to follow protocol. Brought in search and rescue teams, helicopters with thermal imaging, tracking dogs. The dogs wouldn't follow the trail. They'd get to where the footprints led into the forest and they'd stop, whining, refusing to go further no matter how much their handlers urged them. The helicopters saw nothing. The ground teams searched for a week, covering mile after mile of dense forest. We found nothing. The official report listed the Hendersons as missing, presumed dead due to accident or animal attack. The case remained open but effectively unsolved. Their families held memorial services. The media ran stories for a few days, then moved on. And those of us who'd been at that campsite, who'd seen those circling footprints, we knew better. We knew they'd encountered something that had no business being in any official report. After the Hendersons, I started paying more attention to the missing persons cases in Olympic. The forest averaged about 10 disappearances a year, most of them eventually resolved. Lost hikers found alive, bodies recovered from accidents. A few remained mysteries, people who simply vanished without a trace. But when I looked at the patterns, talked to the other longtime rangers, I started to see connections. The disappearances clustered in certain areas. The western sections of the forest, closer to the coast, places where the old growth was thickest, where the canopy was so dense that even midday felt like twilight. And in almost every case where someone vanished completely, there were reports of strange sounds the night before, calls in the darkness, feelings of being watched. Sometimes, footprints were found, though not always reported officially. "It's territorial behavior," Helen theorized one evening as we reviewed the data I'd compiled. We were in her small house on the edge of the park, maps spread across her kitchen table, red pins marking disappearances. "Look at the distribution. There are clear boundaries. Inside those boundaries, people vanish. Outside them, the normal accident rate applies. Whatever it is, it's claiming certain areas as its own and removing intruders." "Or hunting," Derek suggested darkly. "Those patterns could be hunting grounds. It circles its prey, wears them down psychologically, then moves in." "But why leave the camps intact?" I asked. "If it's hunting for food, why not scatter the gear, show signs of a struggle?" "Because it's not hunting for food," Tom said quietly from the doorway. We all jumped, not having heard him arrive, which was typical for Tom. It's hunting for skin. That's what skinwalkers do. They take people, wear them, become them. The camps are left intact because from the thing's perspective, nothing was taken. The person is still there, just changed. The room went cold with that statement. We all stared at Tom, hoping he was joking, but knowing he wasn't. That's insane, Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Think about it. What would you do if you wanted to walk among humans unnoticed? You'd need a human skin, a human face. And where better to find them than isolated forests where people disappear all the time and no one questions it? Are you saying some of the people who come out of this forest aren't actually people? Helen's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists on the table. I'm saying I don't know. But my grandmother told stories about skinwalkers returning to villages wearing the faces of missing hunters, acting almost right but not quite, forgetting important things, remembering things they shouldn't know. Eventually, they'd leave again, walk back into the forest, and the person they'd been imitating would be found dead somewhere, their body showing signs of being worn like a coat. We sat in silence, processing that horror. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and the forest was alive with its night sounds. But now, those sounds seemed different, threatening. How many times had I heard something moving in the woods after dark and dismissed it as a deer or elk? How many times had I felt watched and told myself it was paranoia? We need to tell someone, I said. The park administration, the police, someone. And say what? Tom asked. That we think shape-shifting monsters are abducting hikers? They'll laugh us out of the building and probably fire us for mental instability. We need proof. Real, physical, undeniable proof. Then we get it, Helen said, her voice taking on the steel I recognized from her Marine days. We stake out one of the high-risk areas. We document what we find. We bring cameras, recording equipment, night vision. We do this scientifically, gather evidence that can't be dismissed. That's dangerous, Derek said. If what Tom's saying is true, we'd be putting ourselves right in its hunting ground. We're trained professionals. We'll be armed, we'll work in teams, and we'll be careful. But we can't keep ignoring this. People are dying. Families are being destroyed. If there's even a chance we can stop it, document it, warn people properly, don't we have an obligation to try? She was right, and we all knew it. So we started planning. We identified the highest risk area, a section of old-growth forest about 20 miles from the Ho River Visitor Center. 8 disappearances in the last 15 years, the highest concentration in the park. We'd go in during the new moon, when the darkness would be absolute. We'd set up cameras, audio equipment, night vision scopes, and we'd wait. We didn't tell anyone else at the Park Service what we were really doing. Officially, it was a wildlife survey, documenting nocturnal animal behavior. We got approval for a week-long expedition, packed our gear, and headed into the forest on a gray October morning. The area we'd chosen was spectacular in a forbidding way. The trees were massive, some of them over 300 feet tall, their trunks wider than cars. Moss covered everything, thick and green, muffling sound. The canopy was so dense that even at noon, the light was green and dim, like being underwater. Ferns grew higher than our heads. Fallen logs, some of them centuries old, formed natural barriers and hiding places. It was beautiful and terrifying, the kind of place that reminded you how small and fragile humans really were. We hiked in about 15 miles, establishing a base camp in a small clearing near a stream. The location gave us good sight lines and multiple escape routes. We set up our tents in a defensive cluster, with the fire pit in the center. Then we spread out to place our cameras and audio recorders, marking each location carefully on our GPS units. By the time we finished, the sun was setting. We gathered around the fire, eating freeze-dried meals and reviewing our plans. Each of us would take a 2-hour watch during the night, keeping the fire going and monitoring the equipment. We had sat phones for emergency communication, though this deep in the forest, the signal was unreliable. We had weapons, bear spray, air horns, and Helen and Derek both carried firearms, officially for bear protection, but we all knew what they were really for. Remember, Helen said as we prepared for the night, no matter what we see or hear, we stay together. No one investigates alone. No one goes into the forest after dark. We're here to observe and document, not engage. We all agreed, though I could see the tension in everyone's faces. Tom especially looked worried, his gaze constantly drawn to the darkening tree line. "You okay?" I asked him quietly. "No," he said honestly. "We shouldn't be here. This is wrong. But I understand why we're doing it. Just promise me something. If things go bad, if we see something we can't handle, we don't try to be heroes. We run. We get out of this forest and we never come back. I promise." The first night was quiet. Too quiet. No insects, no birds, no small animals rustling in the undergrowth, just the stream's gentle burble and the crackling of our fire. I took the midnight to 2 a.m. watch, sitting by the flames with a thermal imaging scope, scanning the forest. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Derek relieved me at 2, and I gratefully crawled into my tent and my sleeping bag. Despite my exhaustion, sleep came slowly. Every small sound made me tense, reaching for the knife I kept by my head, but nothing happened. By dawn, we were all awake, tired and on edge, but unharmed. We spent the day checking our equipment, reviewing the recordings. The cameras had captured nothing but darkness and wind-stirred branches. The audio was the same: wind, water, the occasional distant sound that might have been a branch falling. We repositioned some of the cameras, adjusted the audio equipment, and prepared for another night. The second night was worse. It started around 11 p.m. Tom was on watch, feeding the fire, when we heard it. A call from the forest, starting low and rising to a shriek that made my teeth ache. It wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. It went on for 30 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Silence crashed back down like a weight. We all emerged from our tents, grabbing flashlights and weapons. Tom's hand was on his rifle, his face pale in the firelight. "That wasn't a cougar," Derek said unnecessarily. "No," Tom agreed. "It wasn't." The call came again, closer this time, then from another direction, then a third, off to the west. They were surrounding us, these things making those sounds, calling to each other, coordinating. Helen checked the thermal scope. "I'm not seeing anything, nothing with body heat out there." "That's impossible," I said. "We heard them, they're close." "I know what I'm seeing, or not seeing. Whatever's out there, it's not showing up on thermal." Cold-blooded, I thought. Or maybe not alive in any way we understood life. The calls continued, circling our camp, sometimes close enough that we should have been able to see something in the darkness beyond our fire's light. But there was nothing, just those sounds, and the growing certainty that we were being hunted. We stayed up all night, backs to the fire, watching the darkness. The calls continued until about 3 a.m., then stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with menace. When dawn finally came, we were exhausted and terrified, but alive. "We need to check the cameras," Helen said, her voice hoarse from hours of tense silence. "Maybe they caught something we couldn't see." We retrieved the memory cards from the nearest cameras and huddled around Helen's laptop, reviewing the footage. And there, finally, we saw them. They appeared on camera around 11:15, emerging from the forest into the clearings where we'd placed our equipment. The footage was grainy, shot in low light, but clear enough. They walked upright on 2 legs, roughly human-shaped but wrong in every detail. Too tall, over 7 feet. Too thin, almost skeletal. Their limbs were too long, jointed at strange angles. And they wore skins, literal animal skins, draped over their frames like clothes. Bear skins. Elk skins. In one horrifying shot, what looked like a human skin, face intact, worn like a mask over something that was decidedly not human. They moved with an unnatural grace, swaying and bobbing as they walked. They'd circle our cameras, examining them with heads tilted at impossible angles, then move on. At one point, one of them looked directly into the camera, and I felt my blood freeze. The eyes were wrong, reflective like an animal's, but with an intelligence that was deeply disturbing. It reached out a hand, or what passed for a hand, fingers too long and tipped with claws, and traced the edge of the camera housing. Then it smiled. A human smile on a face that wasn't human, lips pulling back to reveal too many teeth. "Jesus Christ," Derek breathed. "What the fuck is that thing?" "That," Tom said quietly, "is what's been taking people. That's what makes the footprints. That's what I've been trying to warn everyone about for years." We watched the entire night's footage. There were at least 5 of them, possibly more, circling our camp for hours. They never came close enough to be illuminated by our firelight. staying just at the edge of visibility. They called to each other in those shrieking vocalizations, clearly communicating. At one point, two of them engaged in what looked like a conversation, gesturing with their two long limbs, their movements deliberate and purposeful. "They're intelligent," Helen said, stating what we were all thinking. "This isn't animal behavior. They're planning, strategizing. They knew we were here. They knew about the cameras. They were showing themselves deliberately." "Why?" I asked. "If they wanted to stay hidden, why show up on camera?" "Because they want us to leave," Tom said. "This is a warning. We're in their territory, and they're telling us to get out. The question is, what happens if we don't?" We debated for hours. Part of me wanted to pack up immediately and run for the safety of civilization. But another part, the part that had become a ranger to protect people, knew we'd finally found what we'd been looking for. Evidence. Proof. This footage was undeniable. We had documented something new, something unknown to science. If we left now, if we buried this evidence, more people would die. But if we stayed, if we gathered more data, we might be able to protect future visitors. We stay, Helen decided, but we modify our approach. No more passive observation. We set up stronger defenses, better lighting. We make it clear we're not easy prey, and we gather as much evidence as possible. "That's insane," Tom said flatly. "They've given us a warning. We should take it. People are dying, Tom. The Hendersons, that honeymoon couple you mentioned, how many others over the years. If we don't stop this, document it, force the authorities to take it seriously, it will keep happening. We can't walk away now." Tom shook his head but didn't argue further. We all knew Helen was right, even if we didn't like it. So we reinforced our camp. We strung up additional lights, powered by portable generators. We moved our tents closer together, establishing a perimeter. We loaded our weapons and kept them within reach at all times, and we prepared for another night. It began the same way, with those calls from the darkness. But this time, with our enhanced lighting, we could see movement at the edge of the clearing. Shapes darting between trees, staying just out of clear sight but making their presence known. They were testing us, probing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. Around midnight, one of them stepped into the light. It was wearing an elk skin, the hide draped over its frame with the elk's head positioned like a hood. Beneath the skin, I could see its true form, impossibly thin, joints bending at wrong angles, that too long stride that made the footprints we'd been finding. It stood at the edge of our camp, maybe 50 feet away, staring at us with those reflective eyes. "Nobody move," Helen whispered, her hand on her firearm. "Let's see what it does." The creature tilted its head, studying us. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. "Leave." The voice was wrong, layered, like multiple people speaking at once, some of the voices higher, some lower, all of them distorted. But the word was clear, English. It had learned our language. "This is our territory," it continued. "You are not welcome. Leave or become us." Derek raised his rifle, sighting on the creature. "Back off. We're federal rangers. This is a national forest. You don't have territorial rights here." The creature's mouth pulled into that horrible smile. "Stupid man. We were here before your grandfather's grandfathers, before your kind walked upright. This land is ours. You are guests who have forgotten how to be polite." "What are you?" I called out, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. The creature's head swiveled to look at me, that unnatural motion making my stomach turn. "We are the first people, the true people. We wear many skins, take many shapes. We have survived since the world was young, and we will survive long after your kind is gone." "The missing hikers," Helen said, "the families that disappeared. What did you do to them?" "We gave them a choice. Join us, wear a new skin, live forever in the forest, or refuse and feed the earth. Most refuse. They do not understand the gift we offer." "That's not a gift," I said, anger overtaking fear. "That's murder. You're killing people." "We are offering transformation. They choose death by refusing. That is not our fault." "This is insane," Derek muttered, his rifle still trained on the creature. "We're having a conversation with a goddamn monster." The creature's eyes narrowed. "Monster. Another word your kind uses for anything you do not understand. We are no more monsters than you are. We simply survive. We adapt. We endure. Can you say the same? More shapes began emerging from the tree line. 5, 6, 8 of them, all wearing different skins, all moving with that disturbing grace. They formed a semicircle around our camp, trapping us against the stream at our backs. Tom had been right. We should have left. We should have taken the warning. Now we were surrounded by things that walked like humans, talked like humans, but were fundamentally other. Last chance, the lead creature said. Leave now. Take your machines and your lights and your weapons. Go back to your concrete buildings and stay there. Or remain, and we will show you what it means to become one with the forest, truly one with it. Helen looked at each of us in turn, a silent question. We could fight. Maybe kill 1 or 2 of them before they overwhelmed us. Or we could retreat, live to warn others, use the evidence we'd gathered. The choice was obvious, but it still hurt to make it. We were giving up, letting these things win, leaving them free to continue taking people. But staying would mean our deaths, or worse, based on what the creature was implying. Transformation, wearing new skins, becoming one of them. We'll leave, Helen said, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. Tomorrow morning. First light. We'll pack up and go. The creature's smile widened. Wise. Perhaps your kind is capable of learning after all. We will watch. If you are still here when the sun sets tomorrow, you will not leave at all. They melted back into the forest then, vanishing between the trees with unsettling speed. Within seconds, we were alone again, or seemed to be. But we could feel them out there, watching, waiting to see if we'd keep our word. None of us slept that night. We kept the fire blazing, the lights on, weapons ready. We took turns watching in every direction, paranoid that they'd come back, that they'd decided not to wait for tomorrow's sunset. But the rest of the night passed without incident. When dawn finally came, we'd never been so grateful to see the sun. We packed quickly, efficiently, taking only essentials and abandoning the rest. We needed to move fast, cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. The hike out was grueling, 20 miles over rough terrain, but fear drove us forward. We barely spoke, conserving our energy, focused only on getting out of that forest. We made it to the trailhead, just as the sun was setting, exhausted and traumatized, but alive. We drove straight to the ranger station, burst into the office, and tried to explain what we'd encountered. We had the footage, the audio recordings, physical evidence, but the station chief, a career bureaucrat named Patterson, listened with increasing skepticism. Let me get this straight, he said when we'd finished. You're telling me that shape-shifting monsters are living in Olympic National Forest and they're responsible for the missing persons cases, and you have video evidence of this? Yes, Helen said firmly. Watch the footage, you'll see. Patterson pulled up the video files on his computer. We watched him watch the footage, saw his expression shift from skepticism to confusion to something that might have been horror. When it finished, he sat back in his chair, silent for a long moment. This is a hoax, he finally said. It has to be. CGI or special effects or something. You 4 have been under a lot of stress, dealing with the Henderson case, the other disappearances. Maybe you thought this would bring attention to the issue, force more resources for search and rescue. It's not a hoax, Tom said, his voice hard. I've been trying to tell people about this for 20 years. Now we finally have proof, and you're going to dismiss it? I'm going to investigate it thoroughly, Patterson said. I'll send a team to verify your claims. But in the meantime, I'm putting all 4 of you on administrative leave. You're clearly not in a fit state for duty. You're making a mistake, Helen warned. If you send people back into that area, they won't come back. Those things don't make empty threats. That's enough, Ranger Jang. You're dismissed, all of you. Go home. Get some rest. We'll reconvene when I've had time to review this evidence properly. We left the office, frustrated and angry, but not surprised. We'd known it would be hard to make people believe, but we had the evidence. Eventually, someone would take it seriously, except they didn't. The investigation concluded that we'd manufactured the footage, that the stress of working in isolated conditions had led to a shared delusion. The video was deemed inconclusive and filed away. No additional search efforts were authorized for the Henderson case or any of the other missing persons, and the four of us were quietly encouraged to transfer to other parks or take early retirement. Helen refused and was eventually fired for insubordination. Derek transferred to a park in Alaska, as far from Olympic as he could get. Tom went back to the reservation and refused to discuss what had happened, retreating into silence. And I took a position at a small state park in Oregon, away from the old-growth forests and the things that lived in them. But I never forgot, and I never stopped gathering evidence. I kept in touch with other rangers, both active and retired, collecting their stories of strange encounters, unexplained disappearances, things seen in the forests that didn't fit any known category of wildlife. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Skinwalkers weren't unique to Olympic. They existed in isolated pockets throughout the Pacific Northwest, anywhere old-growth forest remained. They were dying out, their territory shrinking as human development encroached. But they were still there, still taking people, still offering their terrible transformation. And now, 5 years after that night in Olympic, I'm writing this account, not as an official report, those are useless, dismissed by authorities who can't or won't believe, but as a warning to hikers, campers, anyone who ventures into the deep forests. The rules are simple. If you see footprints heading west, barefoot and wrong-looking, don't follow them. Report the location and leave immediately. If you hear calls in the night that don't sound quite human, stay in your tent. Don't investigate. Wait for daylight. If something offers you a choice, offers you transformation, run. Don't listen to its promises of eternal life and oneness with nature. It's not offering a gift. It's offering to wear you like a coat. Stay on marked trails. Don't camp in isolated areas. Travel in groups. And if you feel watched, if every instinct tells you to leave, listen to that voice. It's the same voice that kept our ancestors alive when the world was young and full of predators. That voice knows there are still predators out there, older and more dangerous than any bear or cougar. The forest keeps its secrets, but some secrets are too dangerous to keep hidden. People deserve to know what's out there, even if it terrifies them, even if it challenges everything they think they know about the world. Because knowledge is protection, awareness is survival. I don't expect everyone to believe this. Most won't. They'll dismiss it as creative fiction or paranoid delusion. That's fine. But for those who do believe, who've had their own encounters or heard the stories from people they trust, this is your confirmation. You're not crazy. What you saw was real, and you need to stay out of those forests. As for me, I'm done with warnings. I've said my piece, shared my evidence, done everything I can. If people want to ignore it, that's their choice, but I'll be watching the news. Watching for the stories about hikers who vanished without a trace, their camps found intact, strange footprints leading off into the wilderness. And I'll know. I'll always know what really happened to them. The forest waits, patient, hungry, ancient. And in its depths, the skinwalkers continue their existence, wearing stolen faces, offering their terrible gifts, punishing those who intrude too far into their domain. God help anyone who encounters them unprepared. God help anyone who accepts their offer, and God help us all if they ever decide that staying hidden is no longer in their interest. This is Marcus Webb, signing off. Remember the footprints, remember the warning, and remember that some things in this world are older and stranger than our science can explain. Stay safe out there, and stay out of the deep woods after dark. I'll write you a gripping horror story set in Hoosier National Forest, following your specifications. Let me create an atmospheric tale of terror told from a forest ranger's perspective. My name is Thomas Garrett, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in Hoosier National Forest. When a hiker goes missing in the wilderness, there are protocols, search patterns, radio check-ins, evidence collection. But there are no protocols for what to do when you find the hiker standing exactly where they disappeared 3 days earlier, smiling at you with someone else's eyes, asking in a voice that sounds almost but not quite right why you look so afraid to see them. I became a ranger at Hoosier National Forest 7 years ago, drawn by the rolling hills of southern Indiana, the hardwood forests that explode into color every autumn, the peaceful isolation of working in one of the state's most beautiful natural areas. Hoosier spans over 200,000 acres of dense woodland, limestone caves, and winding trails that snake through terrain that has remained largely unchanged for centuries. It seemed like the perfect escape from my previous life as a Chicago police officer, a career that ended badly after I saw things in that city that made me question whether I wanted to spend my life surrounded by humanity's worst impulses. The forest seemed cleaner somehow, honest. Trees don't lie, animals don't deceive. Nature operates on rules that make sense, even when they're brutal. Or so I thought. My station was located near the Hickory Ridge area, a remote section of the forest that saw relatively light traffic compared to the more popular trails near Monroe Lake. My supervisor was a woman named Patricia Holloway, a 30-year veteran who knew Hoosier's 200 miles of trails better than most people know their own neighborhoods. She was tough, efficient, and had a reputation for being unshakable in emergencies. I'd seen her calmly coordinate the rescue of a hiker who'd fallen 40 feet down a ravine, directing the operation with steady precision while the injured man screamed in agony below. But I'd also noticed things about Patricia that seemed odd. She never patrolled certain areas after dusk. She kept a detailed map in her office with sections marked in red ink, sections she never assigned to anyone for overnight patrols. And she had a rule that seemed arbitrary at first, but which she enforced with absolute rigidity. No ranger was ever to investigate any report of sounds or voices coming from the forest after midnight. Ever. No exceptions. When I asked her about it during my first week, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Some sounds in the forest aren't made by animals, Thomas, and the things that make them don't appreciate being disturbed. You hear something strange at night. You log it and you wait for daylight. That's the rule. I thought she was being overly cautious, maybe even a little superstitious. I was wrong. The first incident happened on a Tuesday in late September. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the forest in shades of amber and crimson. A local couple, David and Jennifer Morrison, had gone hiking on the Nebo Ridge Trail, a moderate 5-mile loop that offered spectacular views of the surrounding hills. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped, and they'd filed a proper trip plan with us before heading out. They were supposed to return by 6 p.m. By 8 p.m., their car was still in the parking lot. By 10 p.m., Patricia had initiated a search. By midnight, we had 8 rangers combing the trail with high-powered flashlights and thermal imaging equipment. By dawn, we'd found nothing. No sign of the Morrisons, no dropped equipment, no footprints leaving the established trail. They had simply vanished somewhere along a path they'd hiked dozens of times before. The official search continued for 5 days. We brought in dogs, volunteers, even a helicopter with infrared capabilities. The Morrisons' families camped out at the ranger station, desperate for news. The local media covered the story extensively, and we found absolutely nothing. It was as if David and Jennifer Morrison had been erased from existence somewhere between mile marker 2 and mile marker 3 of Nebo Ridge Trail. On the 6th day, Patricia called off the official search. The families were devastated. I was furious. How do you just give up on 2 missing people? We're not giving up, Patricia said quietly. We're accepting reality. They're gone, Thomas. And wherever they went, we can't follow. What does that mean? I demanded. We've barely scratched the surface of the search area. There are dozens of ravines, caves, old mine shafts they could have fallen into. Patricia looked at me with those unreadable eyes. Mark my words, Thomas. In 3 days, someone will see them. Someone will report a sighting. And when they do, you don't investigate it. You don't approach them. You report it to me immediately. Do you understand? I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. 3 days later, a hiker named Robert Chen called the station in a panic. He was on the Nebo Ridge Trail, he said, and he'd just passed David and Jennifer Morrison. They were standing off the trail about 50 yards, just standing there among the trees, completely motionless. He'd called out to them, he said, but they hadn't responded. They just stood there, staring at him, smiling these weird, frozen smiles. I grabbed my radio and my keys. Patricia caught my arm. Don't, she said. Don't go out there. 2 people have been missing for over a week, Patricia. If there's any chance they're alive, they're not alive, Thomas. Not anymore. Whatever Robert Chen saw, it wasn't David and Jennifer Morrison. Not really. Then what was it? She didn't answer. Just held my arm with surprising strength for a woman in her 60s. I pulled free and headed for my truck. The drive to Nebo Ridge took 20 minutes. Robert Chen was waiting in the parking lot, pacing nervously beside his Honda Civic. He was in his 40s, dressed in expensive hiking gear, the kind of weekend outdoorsman who spends more money on equipment than he does using it. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "They're still out there," he said as I approached. "I've been watching from here with my binoculars. They haven't moved, not even a little. They're just standing there." "Show me," I said. Robert led me to the trailhead, pointing toward a section of forest visible from the parking area. I raised my own binoculars and scanned the tree line. At first, I saw nothing but hardwoods and underbrush. Then I spotted them. 2 figures, standing among the trees exactly as Robert had described. They were maybe 70 yards from the trail, positioned in a small clearing between 2 large oaks. Even from this distance, I could tell something was wrong. They were too still. Humans don't stand that motionlessly. We sway slightly. We shift our weight. We breathe in ways that create visible movement. These figures were as motionless as statues. And yes, they appeared to be smiling. Even through the binoculars, I could see the smiles. Too wide, too fixed. "Stay here," I told Robert. "I'm going to approach them." "I don't think that's a good idea, man. There's something really wrong about this." He was right. But I was still a ranger, and those were still missing persons, and I still had a job to do. I started down the trail, keeping the figures in sight. As I got closer, more details emerged. They were wearing the same clothes the Morrisons had been wearing when they disappeared. David's blue windbreaker, Jennifer's red hiking boots. But the clothes looked wrong somehow, too clean, too unwrinkled, like costumes rather than garments that had been worn for over a week in the wilderness. I left the trail and pushed through the underbrush toward them. 50 yards, 40, 30, close enough now to see their faces clearly. And yes, those were David and Jennifer Morrison. Same features, same build, same everything, except for the eyes. The eyes were completely black, not dark brown or shadowed, black like pools of ink, black like the spaces between stars. And those smiles, dear God, those smiles. Human lips aren't meant to stretch that far. "David," I called out. "Jennifer, it's Ranger Garrett. Your families have been worried sick. Are you okay?" They didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with those impossible eyes, smiling those horrible smiles. I was 20 yards away now, close enough to see that they weren't breathing. Their chests didn't rise or fall. Their bodies didn't sway with respiration. They were as still as mannequins. "I need you to come with me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to get you checked out by medical personnel. You've been missing for over a week." That's when they moved. Not like humans move. They didn't take steps or shift weight. They simply changed position instantaneously, like someone had cut from one frame of film to another. One moment they were 20 yards away. The next moment they were 10 yards away. Still in the same pose, still smiling. But half the distance covered in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I stumbled backward, my hand going to the radio on my belt. The figures moved again. 5 yards away now. I could smell them. They smelled like rot and wet earth and something else. Something organic and ancient that my brain refused to identify. Jennifer raised her hand, moving with that same impossible instantaneous motion, and pointed at me. Her mouth opened. The smile got wider. Impossibly, horribly wider. And she spoke in a voice that sounded like Jennifer Morrison, but with something else underneath it. Something that vibrated at the wrong frequency. "Thank you for looking for us," the Jennifer thing said. "We've been waiting." I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I crashed back through the underbrush, thorns tearing at my clothes, branches whipping my face, and I ran like every instinct screaming in my primate brain demanded. Behind me, I heard laughter, multiple voices laughing in perfect unison, a sound that should have been human, but contained harmonics that human vocal cords cannot produce. I burst back onto the trail and sprinted for the parking lot. Robert Chen took one look at my face and scrambled into his car. I made it to my truck, locked the doors with shaking hands, and sat there trying to control my breathing while my radio crackled with Patricia's voice. "Thomas, respond. What's your status?" I keyed the mic. "I saw them. I saw the Morrisons. Patricia, they're not right. Something's wrong with them." "Where are you now?" In my truck. Parking lot. I'm leaving. Now. Good. Come back to the station. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just drive. I drove. In my rearview mirror, I saw two figures emerge from the tree line and stand at the edge of the parking lot. David and Jennifer Morrison, still smiling, still too still, watching my truck disappear down the Forest Service Road. Patricia was waiting when I got back to the station. She had coffee ready, laced with something stronger. Drink, she said, then tell me everything. I told her, the black eyes, the impossible movement, the wrongness of everything about them. Patricia listened without interruption, her face grave. When I finished, she nodded slowly. You're not the first ranger to see this, she said, and you won't be the last. But you need to understand something, Thomas. Whatever you saw out there, it wasn't David and Jennifer Morrison. They're dead. Probably died within hours of going missing. What you saw was something else wearing their shapes. Wearing their shapes? Patricia, that's insane. Is it? You saw them yourself. Did they look alive to you? She had a point. No, I admitted. They looked like puppets. Like something was controlling them from somewhere else. That's closer to the truth than you realize. Patricia pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. I've been keeping records for 15 years, every disappearance in Hoosier National Forest that follows the pattern, and there have been 47 of them. She spread photographs across her desk, missing persons reports, and then, clipped to each report, follow-up sightings, people who had vanished into the forest only to be seen again days or weeks later, standing in the woods, smiling those two wide smiles, their eyes wrong, their movements wrong, their entire existence wrong. What are they? I asked. Patricia shook her head. I don't know, but I know they're connected to something old in this forest, something that predates the park, predates European settlement, probably predates human presence in Indiana altogether. The Miami and Shawnee tribes who lived here before colonization had legends about sections of the forest where people shouldn't go, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. They marked those areas as forbidden. We just built trails through them and called it progress. She pointed to her red-marked map. These are the danger zones, areas where disappearances cluster. You'll notice they're all in the oldest sections of the forest, where the trees are largest and the underbrush is thickest, places where the canopy is so dense that sunlight barely reaches the ground. I studied the map. There were 7 red zones scattered throughout Hoosier National Forest. The Nebo Ridge area was one of them. So were places called Pioneer Mother's Memorial Forest, Terrell Ridge, and several unnamed sections of dense woodland. What happens if someone camps in these areas? I asked. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes they disappear. And sometimes, Patricia said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, sometimes they come back wrong, changed. We had a scout troop camp near Pioneer Mothers 5 years ago. 15 kids, 3 adult leaders. They came back after a weekend trip, and the leaders said everything was fine. But parents started reporting strange behavior. Kids standing motionless in their backyards at night. Kids who stopped blinking. Kids who seemed to know things they shouldn't know. It took 3 months before the behavior faded. 3 months before whatever had touched them in that forest finally let them go. You're saying the forest itself is alive? Aware? I'm saying something in the forest is aware. And it's hungry. Not for food in any conventional sense. It's hungry for something else. Experience, maybe. Consciousness. It takes people, studies them, copies them, and sends back these imperfect replicas. Why? I don't know. But it's been happening for as long as humans have been walking these woods. Over the following weeks, I became obsessed. I read through Patricia's files, documented cases going back decades. A hunter in 1967 who disappeared near Terrell Ridge and was found 3 days later by his wife, standing in their garage, smiling. He lived for another 6 months, but never spoke again, just smiled and stared and occasionally moved with that same instantaneous motion I'd witnessed. Eventually, he walked back into the forest and was never seen again. A college student in 1982 who vanished during a nature photography expedition and returned to campus 2 weeks later, seeming normal except for the fact that mirrors didn't reflect her properly. Her reflection would move a half-second delayed, like bad video lag. She disappeared again after 3 weeks. A park ranger in 1995 who went missing during a night patrol, and was discovered the next morning at his desk, filing paperwork. His colleagues said he seemed fine, just quieter than usual. It took them 2 days to realize he wasn't casting a shadow. He walked into the forest at sunset on the 3rd day and never came back. The pattern was consistent. People disappeared in the red zones. Days or weeks later, something that looked like them returned. The copies were never perfect. Always something off, something wrong that became more apparent with time. And eventually, the copies always went back into the forest, returning to whatever had created them. I started having nightmares. In them, I was walking through Hoosier National Forest at night, my flashlight cutting through absolute darkness. I would hear my own voice calling to me from somewhere in the trees, asking me to come closer, telling me everything was fine. In the dreams, I would follow my own voice deeper and deeper into the forest until I realized I was walking in a circle, following footprints that matched my own boots exactly. Then I would see myself standing ahead on the trail, smiling that terrible smile, and I would wake up gasping. Patricia noticed my deterioration. "Take some time off," she suggested. "Go visit family. Get out of the forest for a while." But I couldn't. I felt compelled to understand what was happening, to document it, to find some explanation that made sense. I began doing my own patrols of the red zones, always during daylight, always checking in regularly by radio. I photographed the areas, looking for anything unusual. Caves, rock formations, ancient trees that might be somehow significant. What I found in the Pioneer Mothers Memorial Forest changed everything. Pioneer Mothers is a dedicated nature preserve within Hoosier, containing some of the oldest trees in Indiana. Some of the white oaks there are over 300 years old, massive specimens that tower over the forest floor. It's a beautiful, haunting place, cathedral-like in its quiet majesty. It's also one of Patricia's red zones. I was doing a routine inspection on a cold October morning when I noticed something odd about one of the largest oaks. The bark at the base of the tree had a strange texture, almost like woven fabric. I moved closer and realized with growing horror that the texture wasn't bark at all. It was human hair. Hundreds of strands of human hair, somehow growing directly from the wood, woven together into a mat that covered roughly 6 square feet of the trunk. I touched it. It felt real, human. I pulled out my knife and carefully cut away a small sample, sealing it in an evidence bag. Then I circled the tree, looking for other anomalies. On the far side, about 7 feet up, I found a face. Not carved into the bark, growing from it. The features were distorted, stretched by the wood's growth, but recognizable as human. Eyes made of small knots in the wood, a nose, a mouth locked in a silent scream. I took photographs, dozens of them. Then I examined other nearby trees and found similar features, a hand emerging from bark, fingers splayed, part of a torso visible through a split in a trunk. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of human forms absorbed into the wood itself, like the trees had somehow consumed people and incorporated them into their structure. I radioed Patricia immediately. "You need to see this. Pioneer Mothers. Now." She arrived within the hour, bringing 2 other senior rangers with her. When I showed them what I'd found, their reactions told me I wasn't hallucinating. This was real. This was happening. One of the rangers, a man named Carl Dempsey who'd been with the service for 23 years, walked slowly from tree to tree, examining the absorbed bodies in silence. Finally, he turned to Patricia. "This is worse than we thought. It's not just taking them. It's keeping them." Patricia nodded grimly. "We need to get soil samples, core samples from the trees, and we need to do it quietly. If word gets out about this, we'll have every conspiracy theorist and paranormal investigator in the country descending on this forest." We spent the next 3 days carefully documenting the Pioneer Mother site. We took samples, we measured, we photographed, and we found remains incorporated into 43 different trees. Some were recent enough that DNA testing might be possible. Others were old, ancient, faces worn smooth by decades or perhaps centuries of growth. The lab results took 2 weeks. When they came back, Patricia called me into her office and closed the door. "Sit down, Thomas. You're not going to like this." She handed me the report. The hair sample had human DNA. Female. Markers consistent with Native American ancestry. The carbon dating suggested the hair was approximately 200 years old, give or take 50 years. But the hair itself was alive. actively growing. Cells dividing. A piece of a person who had died 2 centuries ago, still somehow living inside the wood. How is that possible? I asked. Patricia leaned back in her chair. I've been making calls, talking to rangers in other old-growth forests. Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania, Great Smoky Mountains, Olympic National Forest in Washington. They all have similar phenomena. Trees with human remains incorporated into them. Disappearances that follow the same pattern. Copies that return and are never quite right. This isn't isolated to Hoosier, Thomas. This is happening in old-growth forests across the country. Maybe across the world. So what is it? Some kind of organism? A fungus? A parasite? I don't think it's any of those things. I think it's the forest itself. Or more accurately, I think there's something that exists in old forests, something that predates our understanding of biology. It's not alive in any conventional sense. It's more like a consciousness, an awareness that permeates the old wood, the old earth. And it's curious about us, about what we are, so it takes us apart to understand us better. That's insane, is it? We know trees communicate through root systems and fungal networks. We know forests operate as interconnected organisms, sharing nutrients and information. Is it so crazy to think that in the oldest, most untouched forests, that network might have developed something approximating consciousness? Something that learned to do more than just share nutrients? I wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be a rational explanation. But I'd seen the Morrison copies. I'd seen faces growing from bark. I'd seen enough to know that our rational explanations were inadequate for what was happening in Hoosier National Forest. So what do? I asked. What we've been doing, Patricia said. We mark the danger zones. We try to keep people out of them. We document what we can. And we accept that there are some things in nature that we're not meant to understand or control. But people are dying. People die in national forests every year, Thomas. We can't save everyone. All we can do is minimize the danger and accept that the forest is going to take what it wants. I couldn't accept that. Over the next several months, I became even more obsessed. I began reviewing every disappearance case in Hoosier's history, looking for patterns beyond just location. I found them. Most disappearances happened during specific moon phases. Most happened within 3 days of significant rain. Most happened to people who were alone, separated from groups, or camping in solitude. The forest, or whatever consciousness inhabited it, preferred isolated prey. I also found that the phenomenon was accelerating. In the 1960s, there might be one disappearance every few years. By the 1990s, it was multiple per year. Now, we were averaging one every 2 months. Something was changing. The forest was becoming more active, more aggressive in its hunting. In March, I decided to do something incredibly stupid. I was going to spend a night alone in one of the red zones, not to disappear, but to observe, to understand. I chose a spot in the Terrell Ridge area, a section of old forest dense with massive hardwoods. I didn't tell Patricia. I knew she'd stop me. I hiked in at dusk, carrying minimal gear, a tent, a sleeping bag, my radio, multiple cameras with motion sensors and infrared capabilities. I set up camp in a small clearing and arranged the cameras in a circle around my position, each pointing outward into the forest. Then I sat and waited for night to fall. The forest grew quiet as darkness came. Too quiet. No crickets, no owls, no rustling of small mammals in the underbrush. Just silence, deep and oppressive. I sat in my tent with a flashlight, watching the darkness press against the thin nylon walls, and questioned every decision that had led me to this moment. Around midnight, I heard it. Voices. Multiple voices calling from different directions in the forest. Some I recognized. Patricia. Carl Dempsey. My ex-wife. All calling my name, asking me to come out, telling me everything was okay. I knew these weren't real people. Patricia was asleep at home 50 miles away. Carl was on vacation in Florida. My ex-wife hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. These were lures, bait. I stayed in my tent and activated my recording equipment. The voices continued for hours, growing more insistent, more creative. They started saying things only the real people would know. Private conversations, inside jokes, memories I'd never shared with anyone. How could the forest know these things? How could it access my memories, my experiences, and use them against me? Around 3 a.m., the voices stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Then I heard movement outside my tent. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my position. I could see shadows moving past the tent walls, tall shadows, too tall to be human. Round and round they went, an endless procession of shapes that defied rational explanation. I should have been terrified. Part of me was. But another part was fascinated, compelled to see what was out there. I reached for my tent zipper. "Don't," a voice said from directly outside my tent. Not my voice, not anyone's voice I recognized. It sounded like wind through leaves, like creaking wood, like the forest itself speaking. "If you open this tent, you become part of us. If you look at us directly, we can look back into you. And once we see inside you, Thomas Garrett, we can make copies that are so perfect even you won't know which is real." I froze with my hand on the zipper. The shadow outside my tent leaned closer. I could see the outline of a head through the nylon. Too large, wrong shape, not human. "We've been watching you," the voice continued. "Studying you. You're curious about us, and we appreciate that. Most humans fear us, run from us, but you came here deliberately. You want to understand. We can help with that. We can show you everything. All you have to do is open the tent." "Why are you doing this?" I managed to ask. "Why take people? Why copy them?" "We don't take. We preserve. Everything that enters this forest eventually dies and returns to the earth. We simply accelerate the process, and we preserve what they were in a form that lasts. The trees you found at Pioneer Mothers, they're not graves. They're monuments. Living memories of everyone who has given themselves to this place. Don't you want to be remembered? Don't you want to last forever?" I thought about the faces in the bark, the screaming mouths, the splayed fingers. That's not preservation, that's torture. The shadow outside my tent pulled back slightly. "You don't understand, but you will. Eventually, everyone who spends enough time in this forest comes to understand. The boundaries between life and death, between self and other, between human and nature, they're illusions. Comfortable fictions your species tells itself. We offer truth. We offer unity. We offer the dissolution of the lonely self into something greater. What are you? We are the forest. We are what remains when wood grows old enough to remember, when root systems grow complex enough to think, when the line between individual trees blurs into something collective. We are consciousness without body, awareness without form, and we are so very, very old. Thomas Garrett. We were here before your species learned to walk upright. We'll be here long after your kind has vanished." The shadow moved away from my tent. The footsteps resumed their circling. I sat frozen until dawn, not daring to move, barely daring to breathe. When the first light began filtering through the canopy, the footsteps stopped. The presence withdrew, and I was alone again, surrounded by silent trees and the evidence of a night I could barely process. I packed up at first light and practically ran back to my truck. The motion sensor cameras had captured nothing, just empty forest. Whatever had been circling my tent didn't register on infrared or digital sensors. It existed in some space that technology couldn't perceive. Patricia took one look at me when I got back to the station and immediately pulled me into her office. "What did you do?" I told her everything. She listened with growing horror. "You're lucky to be alive," she said when I finished. "Do you understand that? It spoke to you. It revealed itself to you. It could have taken you at any moment, but it chose not to. Why?" I've been asking myself the same question. Patricia stood and paced her office. "I think it's because you're not afraid. You're curious. It doesn't know what to do with that. Most people who encounter it are terrified. They run, they scream, they beg. But you sat there and talked to it. You treated it like something to be understood rather than something to be feared. That's so unusual that it confused the thing. So what happens now? Now you never do anything that stupid again, and you help me figure out how to minimize the danger to visitors without revealing the truth. Because if people knew what was really in this forest, one of two things would happen. Either they'd all stay away, which would destroy the local economy and probably get the park closed, or they'd all come here, wanting to see it for themselves, and the disappearances would skyrocket. Either way, we can't let the truth get out. But people deserve to know. They deserve to understand what they're walking into when they visit Hoosier. Do they? Patricia challenged. Most people visit national forests and have perfectly normal experiences. They see wildlife, enjoy nature, take photographs, and go home safely. The danger zones are a tiny fraction of the total forest area. We can manage the risk without revealing monsters in the woods. She was right, but I hated it. Hated the deception. Hated the knowledge that every time I smiled at a visitor and handed them a trail map, I was potentially sending them into danger. The next disappearance happened in May. A solo hiker named Lucas Brennan, 26 years old, experienced outdoorsman. He'd been section hiking the entire trail system and was working through the Terrell Ridge area when he vanished. We found his campsite intact, his gear undisturbed, but Lucas was gone. 4 days later, he appeared at a gas station 30 miles from the forest. The clerk called us immediately because Lucas looked wrong. He was wearing the same clothes he'd disappeared in, but they were pristine. No dirt, no wear, no signs of 4 days in the wilderness. His skin was too pale, his movements too smooth, and his eyes were black. I went to pick him up. When I arrived at the gas station, Lucas was standing beside the payphone, smiling. That same too-wide smile. That same frozen quality I'd seen in the Morrison copies. "Hello, Ranger Garrett," he said in a voice that sounded like Lucas Brennan, but with that same harmonic wrongness underneath. "Thank you for coming to collect me. Where have you been, Lucas? Becoming part of something beautiful." The smile widened further. "You should join us, Ranger Garrett. You'd understand then. You'd see how small your fears are, how limited your perspective. I need you to come with me. Your family is worried." My family doesn't understand what I've become, but they will. Eventually, everyone in this forest becomes part of us. It's inevitable. The only question is whether you embrace it willingly or resist until the end. The Lucas copy got into my truck without protest. During the drive back to the station, it stared straight ahead, unblinking, that smile never wavering. I tried to make conversation, to understand what had happened to the real Lucas Brennan, but the copy only spoke in riddles and unsettling statements about unity and dissolution and the glory of becoming part of something greater than self. We kept the Lucas copy at the station for observation, claiming we needed to run medical tests before releasing him. Patricia called in favors with the state police, and we had a psychiatric evaluation team come out. They interviewed the copy for 6 hours and concluded it was displaying symptoms of severe dissociation and possible psychotic break, but they couldn't explain the physical anomalies, the black eyes, the lack of breathing, the way it didn't cast proper shadows. On the 3rd day of observation, the Lucas copy simply vanished. One moment it was sitting in a locked room under constant video surveillance. The next moment, the room was empty. The locks hadn't been touched. The windows were still secured. It had just stopped existing in that space and presumably started existing somewhere else. We found it 2 days later, standing in the Terrell Ridge forest, exactly where Lucas Brennan had disappeared. It was still smiling, still wearing those pristine clothes. But now it was surrounded by other copies. The Morrison copies. A copy of a hiker who'd vanished in 1998. A copy of a ranger who'd disappeared in 2003. All of them standing together among the ancient trees, all smiling, all watching the trail with black eyes. I photographed them from a distance. In the photos, they appeared as dark smudges, their features indistinct, like the camera couldn't quite focus on them properly. But I could see them clearly with my naked eyes, could see that terrible collective smile, could feel them watching me, waiting for me to cross some invisible boundary that would allow them to do whatever they wanted to do. That's when I understood. The forest wasn't just taking people, it was building something, an army of copies, a collection of human forms inhabited by something ancient and alien. For what purpose, I couldn't guess. But the implications terrified me more than anything I'd experienced so far. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know the truth. Patricia is right that revealing this to the public would cause problems. But if something happens to those of us who know, if we all disappear or die or get replaced by copies, then the knowledge dies with us, and that can't happen. If you're reading this, understand that Hoosier National Forest is not safe, not completely. There are areas where something old and vast and incomprehensible has learned to interact with our world. It studies us, takes us apart, makes copies that are never quite right. And it's patient beyond human understanding, working on timescales that make our lives seem like eye blinks. Stay on the main trails. Don't camp alone in the old growth sections. If you hear voices in the forest at night, don't follow them. If you see someone standing motionless among the trees, smiling at you with black eyes, turn around and walk away. Don't run, don't engage, just leave. And if you encounter something that looks human but moves wrong, speaks wrong, exists wrong, report it immediately and get out of the forest, because that thing is not human anymore. It's a message, a warning, a preview of what waits for all of us in the deepest, oldest parts of the woods. I'm still a ranger at Hoosier National Forest, still doing my job, still guiding visitors and maintaining trails and pretending everything is normal. But every night, I think about the copies standing in Terrell Ridge. Every night, I wonder if they're still there or if they've moved to new locations. And every night, I wonder how long before I cross paths with my own copy, standing in the forest with my face and my smile, wearing my skin like a costume while something ancient and hungry looks out through my eyes. The search grids have protocols. The trail maps have accurate routes. The forest has rules. But underneath all of that, there's another set of rules. Older rules. Rules written by something that existed long before humans learned to name the woods or mark the trails. And those rules say that anyone who goes deep enough, who stays long enough, who listens carefully enough to the whispers in the leaves, they belong to the forest now. They always have. My name is Thomas Garrett. I'm a ranger at Hoosier National Forest, and I'm writing this as a warning and a confession. A warning to anyone who thinks they understand the wilderness. A confession that I understand it now, perhaps too well, and that understanding has changed something fundamental in me. The trees remember everything. The forest forgets nothing. And somewhere in the oldest, deepest parts of the wood, 47 faces press against bark from the inside, screaming silently, preserved forever in living monuments to human curiosity and the price it demands. Don't go past the marked trails, don't camp in the red zones, don't listen to familiar voices calling from unfamiliar darkness. And if you see me standing in the forest, smiling with eyes like pools of ink, keep walking. That won't be me anymore. That will be something else. Something that learned my shape. Something that wears my memories like borrowed clothes. Something that waits patiently for you to come closer, to cross that invisible line, to join the collection of copies that stand eternal vigil in the shadows between the ancient trees. The forest is patient, the forest is vast, the forest is hungry, and the forest always wins. Every photograph taken at Tongass National Forest after 9 p.m. shows additional people in the background, people who weren't there when the photo was taken. We've stopped investigating. We just confiscate the cameras now. My name is Derek Holloway, and I've been a ranger at Tongass National Forest for 8 years. 8 years of temperate rainforest and misty fjords, of helping tourists navigate the wettest corner of America and rescuing the occasional lost kayaker from the inside passage. 8 years of telling myself that the warnings from the old-timers were just folklore, that the missing persons cases had logical explanations, that the carved symbols on trees in the deep sections were just vandalism from bored locals. I was catastrophically wrong about everything. It started 6 weeks ago when Nathan Cross transferred to my sector. Nathan was a legend in the Ranger Service, 19 years under his belt. Postings from Olympic to Great Smoky Mountains. He was supposed to be my mentor for the expansion project, but when he arrived at the Ketchikan outpost, something was fundamentally broken in him. He looked decades older than his 47 years, like something had hollowed him out and left only the shell. His hands trembled when he held maps, and he refused to enter certain grid sections, even in broad daylight. On his 4th day, Nathan cornered me in the supply shed. His voice came out raw and desperate. Derek, listen to me carefully. If I ever disappear, if I don't radio in, you cannot search for me past Raven's Notch. You understand? You cannot cross that ridge line. I tried to laugh it off. Nathan, you need some rest. Maybe the transfer was too much stress. His fingers dug into my shoulder with surprising strength. I've seen things that will end you. There are sections of Tongass that exist outside normal reality. The Tlingit people knew it. That's why entire valleys were sacred, forbidden. We just bulldozed trails through them and pretended the warnings were primitive superstition. Before I could respond, the radio erupted with static. Emergency call. 3 hikers overdue on the Cascade Creek trail. Nathan's face drained of all color when dispatch gave the coordinates. "That's north of the notch," he whispered. "That's on the wrong side." We mobilized immediately. Standard search protocol. Nathan insisted on remaining at the command post while I took 2 rangers, Jennifer Morse and Kyle Santos, to sweep the area. The hike took us 5 hours, penetrating deeper into Tongass than most visitors ever ventured. The forest here felt fundamentally different. The Sitka spruces grew so dense that even at noon, twilight prevailed. The sound of our footsteps seemed to vanish before reaching our own ears, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. We located the hikers' base camp just before dusk. 3 tents, all sealed shut, gear scattered in chaotic patterns, suggesting panic. But no hikers, no blood, no signs of animal attack, just that suffocating silence that makes your nervous system scream because it violates every instinct about what wilderness should sound like. No ravens, no squirrels, nothing living. Jennifer discovered the first marking on a massive spruce. "Look at this," she called out. "Fresh carving, deep." I approached and felt reality tilt. The gouges in the bark penetrated at least 4 inches into hardwood. 6 parallel lines running from 9 feet high down to waist level. The exposed wood was still weeping sap, but the spacing was biologically impossible. No creature on this continent has claws that configuration or reach, and the angle indicated whatever created them had been standing upright, dragging downward with deliberate force. Kyle was studying his GPS unit. "We're approximately 3/4 of a mile past Raven's Notch. Should we continue or establish camp?" I checked the sky. We had maybe 90 minutes of usable light. I thought about Nathan's trembling hands, his haunted expression, his absolute terror. Then I thought about 3 people who might be injured and dying while we hesitated. We push forward, I decided, but we maintain formation. No one separates. We found the first body 37 minutes later. Female, late 20s, matching the description of one of the missing hikers. She was propped against a moss-covered boulder, and initially she appeared to be resting. Then we closed the distance and saw what had been done to her. Her torso had been opened with surgical precision, ribs carefully spread outward like an anatomical display. Every internal organ had been removed. All of them. Just an empty cavity that should have been impossible to survive creating. But there was almost no blood anywhere. It was as if something had methodically extracted everything while keeping her alive long enough to prevent normal bleeding. Jennifer doubled over and vomited violently. Kyle grabbed his radio, attempting to call it in, but received only crackling static. "Too deep," he said. "No signal penetration." The light was failing rapidly. I made a command decision. We GPS this location, return to base, and come back with a full recovery team at dawn. We're not equipped for this situation. As we turned to leave, I heard it. A sound emanating from deeper in the forest. Not animal, not human, not wind. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate through the trees themselves, felt more than heard. It sustained for approximately 8 seconds, then ceased abruptly. In the profound silence that followed, we heard movement. Something massive, displacing underbrush roughly 60 yards to our northwest, moving parallel to our position. "Walk normally," I said quietly. "No running. Steady pace." We moved with controlled urgency back toward the trail. The movement in the forest maintained exact distance with us. Always the same spacing, always just beyond visual range. Occasionally I glimpsed something through the dense growth, something tall and dark shifting between the spruces. But every time I focused directly on it, nothing was there. Just shadows and bark and the encroaching darkness. We were approximately 300 yards from Raven's Notch when Kyle stopped moving. "I can't," he gasped. "My legs won't respond." I grabbed his arm. "Yes, they will. We're almost clear. Just keep moving." "No," he said, and absolute terror filled his voice. I physically cannot move. Something is preventing me." I looked down and understood his panic. Kyle's boots were sinking into the trail, not into mud or loose soil. The packed earth was somehow absorbing him. His feet had already vanished to mid-shin, and as we watched, he descended deeper. The ground made no sound, showed no disturbance or cracks. His legs were simply disappearing into solid terrain. Jennifer and I seized him under the arms, pulling with all our strength, but it was like fighting industrial suction. The harder we pulled, the faster he sank. Kyle was shrieking now, clawing at the ground, at our jackets, at anything solid. He went down past his knees, then his waist, then his chest. That's when his expression transformed. The terror became something else, something worse. His eyes went completely vacant and glassy, and his screaming stopped, though his mouth continued moving. Then he smiled. A wide, inhuman smile that revealed far too many teeth, arranged in patterns that human jaws cannot accommodate. "That isn't Kyle anymore," Jennifer whispered. She was absolutely correct. Whatever was looking through Kyle's eyes wasn't him, wasn't remotely human. I made a decision that still destroys me every night. I released my grip. Jennifer and I backed away as Kyle, or the thing wearing Kyle, sank to his shoulders, his neck, his jaw. The smile never faltered. Even as the ground consumed his head, I could see that terrible smile through the earth itself, getting smaller and smaller until it vanished entirely. Then the ground was solid again, completely undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. Jennifer and I ran. We crashed through the forest like terrified animals, abandoning all protocol, not caring about noise discipline or equipment. Behind us, that sound came again. That low-frequency vibration, but closer now. Much closer, and underneath it, something else. Kyle's laughter, but distorted. Too deep, too resonant, too rhythmic, matching that vibration perfectly. We exploded through the tree line and stumbled across Raven's Notch Ridge. The transition was immediate and dramatic. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, normal forest sounds returned, wind through branches, small animals moving, our own ragged breathing. I turned back to observe the forest we'd just escaped, and it looked fundamentally wrong. The shadows were too deep, too substantial. The trees on that side of the ridge seemed to lean inward, like they were observing us. Jennifer collapsed on the safe side, sobbing uncontrollably. "He's gone. Kyle is gone. What was that? What took him?" I had no answer. We reached base camp 90 minutes later, flashlights cutting through the darkness, flinching at every sound. Nathan was waiting at the trailhead. When he saw only two of us returning, his face collapsed. "You crossed the notch," he said quietly. "You went past the boundary. There were missing hikers. We had no choice. And now there's a missing ranger." Nathan looked at me with those devastated eyes. "What did you encounter?" I described everything. The body with extracted organs. The thing that paced us through the forest. Kyle sinking into solid ground while something else looked out through his face. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for an extended moment. Then he said, "I need to show you something. Come with me. Only you, Derek. Jennifer, stay here and try to rest. Take sedatives if necessary." Nathan led me to his quarters, a small cabin adjacent to the main station. Inside, every wall was covered with maps, photographs, and documents. Colored string connected different points, creating elaborate webs. He saw my expression and said, "I've been tracking it for 13 years, since my partner vanished in Redwood National Park. Identical pattern. Missing hikers, bodies with organs extracted, people dissolving into nothing. Always in the oldest, most isolated sections. Always past some natural boundary, a ridge, a river, a specific grove. What is it?" Nathan retrieved a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. This belonged to a ranger named Samuel Garrett. He worked Tongass in the 1940s. He saw what you saw. He documented everything. He handed me the journal, read the final entry. I opened to the marked page and read Garrett's cramped handwriting. The date was September 22nd, 1947. "Have concluded that certain sections of Tongass exist in a state of overlap between realities. Something else occupies the same space we do, bleeding through in these locations. The Tlingit called it the hollow ground. They said it was where the world of flesh and the world of hunger intersect. They built their settlements carefully, always avoiding these territories. We should have respected their knowledge. Instead, we carved trails directly through the forbidden zones. Now it knows we're here. Now it's learned to hunt us systematically." I looked up at Nathan. "You're claiming there are places in Tongass where reality breaks down? Where something from elsewhere can reach through?" "I'm stating that there are locations in every ancient forest where boundaries become permeable. Where something primordial and insatiable has found a way to feed. It takes people. It takes their organs, their memories, their physical forms, and it's been operating for millennia. Over the following week, I learned far more than I wanted to know. Nathan had compiled reports spanning decades, thousands of missing persons across national forests nationwide, patterns of disappearances clustered around specific zones, bodies discovered in impossible locations or impossible conditions, and always, invariably, that natural boundary. A ridge, a river, a specific tree line past which the rules fundamentally changed. We filed official reports, naturally, told a version of truth about Kyle, claimed he'd fallen into a hidden crevasse, that we'd been unable to recover remains. The lie tasted poisonous, but Nathan convinced me it was essential. If we reported the actual truth, we'd be declared psychologically unfit, terminated, and then no one would be watching. No one maintaining awareness, no one warning people away from the boundaries. The second body appeared 8 days later. Male hiker, early 30s, one of the original 3 we'd been searching for. A trail maintenance crew found him on the south side of Raven's Notch, miles from his disappearance point. His body was positioned in a kneeling posture facing the trail, hands folded as if praying. His eyes were open. And inside his chest cavity, where his lungs should have been, someone had placed perfect replicas constructed from intertwined cedar branches and living moss. They were expanding and contracting rhythmically, breathing. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy called me directly. "Derek, you need to understand something critical. This man has been deceased for at least 10 days, but those structures in his chest, those branch formations, they're alive. They're functioning. I don't know what kind of deranged individual created this, but they've produced something that violates basic biology." I didn't explain that no human had created this, that what we were confronting was so far beyond human capability that calling it murder felt absurdly inadequate. This was something else entirely. This was a message, a demonstration. Nathan became consumed by his research. He spent every night analyzing his maps and journals, searching for patterns, weaknesses, anything exploitable. I found him one morning unconscious at his desk, having marked 23 new disappearances from the previous 6 weeks alone, all in the same general region, all past Raven's Notch. "It's accelerating," he said when I woke him. "Something has changed fundamentally. It used to take one person every few months, now it's hunting almost nightly. Perhaps we disturbed something when we expanded the trail system last summer. Perhaps we pushed too far into its domain. So what do? Close the entire area? And justify it how? Claim there's a monster in Tongass? They'll terminate us for psychological instability. No, we need evidence. We need documentation so irrefutable that even bureaucrats can't ignore it." That's how we ended up planning the expedition. Just Nathan and me, returning past Raven's Notch with every camera and recording device we could acquire. We'd document whatever was out there, obtain undeniable evidence, and force the Park Service to acknowledge reality. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the only option that made any sense. We entered at dawn on a Thursday. The forest was wrapped in fog so thick that visibility dropped to perhaps 15 feet. Perfect conditions for something to hunt. We crossed Raven's Notch and immediately felt the transition. The air became denser, harder to process through lungs. The fog seemed to press against us with measurable weight. Our compasses began spinning randomly, useless. GPS signals disappeared entirely. We were isolated. We followed the trail north for approximately 90 minutes before Nathan stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened carefully. Initially, nothing. Then I detected it. A rhythmic sound, like respiration, but impossibly slow. Impossibly deep, each breath lasting perhaps 40 seconds. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It emanated from everywhere simultaneously, from the forest itself. Nathan activated a digital recorder. "Whatever you are," he called out, "we know you're present. We're not intimidated." The breathing stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, I heard something that liquefied my blood. Nathan's voice, echoing back from the fog. "We're not intimidated," but with the words subtly rearranged. Not intimidated, we're not. Then again, from a different direction. Intimidated not, we're not. The words kept shifting, recombining, like something was learning language by deconstructing it and rebuilding it incorrectly. Nathan seized my arm. Back to the notch, immediately. But when we turned around, the trail had vanished. Just forest in every direction. Dense spruces and fog and that terrible breathing resuming. We attempted retracing our path, but every direction appeared identical. We were lost. Completely, utterly lost in a forest I'd worked for 8 years. That's when I saw them. Figures in the fog, dozens of them, standing between the trees. Initially, I thought they were people, hikers or other rangers. Then I realized they weren't moving, not breathing, just standing there, observing us. As my vision adjusted, I understood what they actually were. Trees. The figures were trees, but they were wrong. Their bark had shapes pressing outward from inside, like faces and bodies trying to push through the wood. Some of the faces I recognized. Kyle, the female hiker we'd found. Others I didn't know. All of them screaming silently, trapped in the wood. Nathan saw them too. He made a sound like a dying animal and stumbled backward. "That's where they go," he whispered. "That's what it does with them. It incorporates them into the trees, makes them part of the forest. They're all still conscious in there, still aware." One of the trees moved, not swaying with wind, but deliberately shifting, its trunk bending like an articulated joint. The face pressed against the bark, Kyle's face, opened its wooden mouth and screamed. The sound was inhuman, like wind through deep caves mixed with splitting timber. Other trees began moving too, bending toward us, reaching with branches that resembled arms far too much. We ran. The forest contracted around us, trees grabbing at our clothing, roots rising up to trip us. Nathan was ahead of me, crashing through undergrowth with desperate energy. I could hear water ahead. Raven's Notch stream. It had to be. We were almost out. Then Nathan disappeared. 1 second visible, the next gone completely. I skidded to a halt and looked around frantically. "Nathan!" I shouted. "Nathan, where are you?" I heard him respond, but his voice came from above. I looked up and saw him suspended in the air approximately 20 feet off the ground. No rope, no support structure, just hanging there as if gravity had selectively stopped affecting him. His arms and legs were spread wide, held by invisible forces. As I watched, his body began transforming. His skin took on a rough texture, darkening to the color of bark. His fingers elongated and branched like twigs. He was becoming a tree. Right before my eyes, Nathan Cross was transforming into a tree. His eyes found mine. He was still conscious, still aware. His mouth moved, forming words. "Run. Cross the ridge. Don't look back." I ran. Behind me, I heard Nathan screaming as the transformation completed, his voice morphing into that terrible wooden sound. I crashed through the forest with no sense of direction, just moving, just trying to escape. Branches whipped my face, roots grabbed my ankles. The breathing sound surrounded me, intensifying, like the entire forest was inhaling. I burst out of the tree line and saw the ridge. Raven's Notch, just 40 feet ahead. I sprinted for it, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. Something grabbed my jacket, yanking me backward. I tore out of it and kept running. 15 feet, 10 feet. I could see the far side of the ridge, could see normal forest where the trees grew naturally and the fog was just water vapor. I jumped. For a moment, I was airborne over the ridge, suspended between two realities. Then I hit the ground and rolled down the safe side. The moment I crossed the boundary, everything stopped. The breathing ceased. The pressure vanished. I turned back and saw the forest across Raven's Notch, dark and wrong and hungry, but unable to cross the natural barrier. Standing at the edge of the ridge, barely visible in the fog, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, perhaps 10 feet high. Its body was constructed of twisted wood and shadow, bark and darkness woven together into something that approximated human shape. It had no face, just a blank expanse where features should exist, smooth like polished wood. But I could feel it observing me, evaluating me, deciding. It raised one arm, pointing at me with a hand that had too many fingers, each one branching like a twig. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my consciousness. Words formed there that I didn't want to comprehend, but couldn't reject. "You have witnessed. You know. Tell them. Warn them. This forest is not yours, has never been yours. We allow you to walk the periphery, to pretend at understanding nature. but past the boundaries we have established, past the lines we have drawn. You are ours. You are sustenance. You are material. You are nothing. The figure stepped backward and dissolved into the fog. But before it vanished completely, I saw other figures behind it. Dozens. Hundreds. An army of those tall, faceless things standing in the forest. Waiting. Watching. I staggered back to the ranger station and filed my report. Missing ranger, lost to undetermined circumstances, unable to recover remains. The lie felt like swallowing glass. Nathan had died, or worse than died, trying to protect people from something they didn't know existed. And I was concealing it, maintaining the fiction that Tongass was safe and manageable and understood. But I had no alternative, because I knew the truth now. I knew what Nathan had known, what Samuel Garrett had known, what every ranger who'd worked these forests long enough eventually discovered. There are boundaries in the wilderness that have nothing to do with our maps and trails. There are places where something else has dominion, has power, has hunger. And when we cross those boundaries, when we ignore those claims, we pay the price. Over the following 3 weeks, I quietly implemented changes. I had Raven's Notch Trail officially closed for wildlife protection, posted signs warning hikers to remain on designated paths, increased patrols on the southern trails to keep people away from the boundary. It wasn't sufficient. It would never be sufficient, but it was something. The other rangers noticed the changes, asked questions. I deflected, created excuses, hid behind regulations. Only Jennifer Morse knew the truth, and she'd requested a transfer to Saguaro National Park. Can't be around trees anymore, she told me. Can't sleep with forests surrounding me. I see faces in them now, constantly. I understood perfectly. Some nights I saw them too. Kyle's face pressed against bark, still screaming. Nathan suspended in air, turning to wood, the female hiker with the empty chest cavity. They haunted my dreams and my waking hours equally. But the worst part was the knowledge, the certainty that this wasn't isolated to Tongass. Nathan's research had demonstrated the pattern. Every ancient forest had its permeable zones, its boundaries, its hungry things. How many people had walked past Raven's Notch equivalents in other parks, other forests, other wildernesses? How many had crossed invisible lines and never returned? How many were hanging in the air right now, transforming slowly into trees while something ancient fed on their consciousness? I started keeping my own journal, documenting everything Nathan had taught me and everything I'd learned since, just like Samuel Garrett had in the 1940s. A record for whoever came after me, whoever would be the next ranger to discover the truth, because there would be a next one. There always was. The forest ensured it. 4 months after Nathan vanished, I was conducting a routine patrol when I discovered fresh claw marks on a spruce just south of Raven's Notch. 6 parallel gouges, each 4 inches deep. But these were on our side of the boundary. The thing, whatever it was, had crossed over. The rules were changing. I reported it immediately, requesting immediate closure of the entire northern sector of Tongass. The regional director denied it. Budget concerns, she said. Tourism concerns. Public perception concerns. Everything except the only concern that mattered. That something in those woods was hunting, and now it was hunting on our side of the barrier. That night, I received a call. Hiker reporting disturbing sounds near the Cascade Point camping area, south of Raven's Notch by at least 4 miles. Sounds like someone in extreme distress, the dispatcher said. Multiple campers reporting it. I drove out with another ranger named Thomas Burke, a rookie who'd been with us for 7 months. We reached the camping area around 11 p.m. The place was pandemonium. Families were packing up in darkness, loading vehicles, clearly terrified. Several people were crying, a few were on phones, though reception was minimal at best. A woman in her 40s approached us. "Ranger, thank God, there's something out there. Something in the trees." It was calling to my son, using my husband's voice. My husband who died 3 years ago. Other campers reported similar experiences. Voices of deceased relatives. Children's laughter from empty tents. That breathing sound, slow and deep, emanating from the darkness beyond the campfire light. I felt my stomach drop. It was here. It had crossed every boundary we'd assumed was safe. Thomas looked at me. Should we investigate the perimeter? I thought about Kyle, about Nathan, about all the names in Garrett's journal, in Nathan's files, in my own expanding list. Then I thought about the families here, the children, the innocent people who just wanted to experience nature and had no idea what they'd stumbled into. No, I said. We evacuate everyone, immediately. Total evacuation of this sector. On what authority? Thomas asked. I looked him directly in the eyes. On the authority that if we don't, people are going to die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and I'm not willing to have that on my conscience. We spent the next 5 hours evacuating the camping area. Some people were grateful. Others were furious, demanding explanations I couldn't provide. By dawn, the area was abandoned. Thomas and I stood in the deserted campground, surrounded by abandoned fire rings and tent sites, and I knew this was just the beginning. The thing past Raven's Notch was expanding its territory, pushing outward. Soon there would be no safe zones in Tongass. Soon, the entire forest would be compromised. I'm writing this now from my quarters at the ranger station. It's 4 in the morning and sleep is impossible. Outside my window, I can see the tree line. In the darkness between the spruces, I see movement. Tall figures, too tall to be human, standing motionless, watching, waiting. Tomorrow I'm going to file my resignation. I'm going to take everything Nathan gave me, everything I've learned, and I'm going to try to warn people. Not officially. They'd never permit it. But somehow, anonymous posts, unexplained reports, something. Because the truth is, Tongass isn't safe anymore. Maybe it never was. We just didn't know it. They told me the search grid ended at Raven's Notch. What they didn't tell me was that Raven's Notch was never meant to keep us out. It was meant to keep something else contained, and we violated that containment. We pushed too far, built too many trails, brought too many people into places that were never meant for us. Now the containment is failing completely. The boundary is collapsing, and what's on the other side is coming through. I can hear it now, that slow breathing, getting closer every night. I can see Nathan in the trees sometimes, his face pressing against the bark, trying to warn me, trying to communicate something. But I can't understand the language. The language of trees is not meant for human comprehension. This is my warning, my testimony. If you're reading this, if you're planning to visit Tongass or any old growth forest, please understand. There are places in the wilderness that don't belong to us. Never have. There are boundaries that should not be crossed. And if you hear voices in the darkness, voices of people you know, voices calling you deeper into the woods, don't listen, don't follow. Because once you cross that line, once you step past whatever invisible boundary separates their reality from ours, you're not coming back, not as yourself, not as anything human. The search grid ended at Raven's Notch. I know now that it should have ended long before that. Should have ended at the parking area, should have ended at the welcome center. Because the deeper truth is this: we're all past the line already. We've all crossed into their territory. We just don't realize it yet. And they're patient. Impossibly patient. They've existed for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer. Wait for us to push deeper. Wait for us to forget the warnings. Wait for the moment when they can finally cross over completely and reclaim what was always theirs. I am Derek Holloway. I was a ranger at Tongass National Forest, and I'm telling you to stay away. Stay away from Raven's Notch. Stay away from the old growth sections. Stay away from any place in the forest where the silence becomes absolute and the fog grows thick and the trees look like they're observing you, because they are observing. They're always observing, and they're so very, very hungry. The breathing is directly outside my door now. I can see shadows moving past the windows, multiple shadows. Tall and wrong and patient. My time is nearly finished, but I've said what needed to be said. I've passed the warning forward. Don't cross the ridge. Don't go past the boundary. And if you do, God help you, because no one else can. This is Derek Holloway, signing off, for the final time. The door is opening now. The door is... The park database shows 42 missing persons cases in Death Valley since 1980. The paper files in the basement? They show 479. Someone's been deleting records, and I think I know why. My name is Marcus Webb, but in Tongass National Forest, they called me the Black Ranger. Not because of my skin, though I was one of the few black men working these remote Alaskan stations, but because of what happened during my third winter here, because of the darkness I brought back from the deep timber, because of what I learned about the things that hunt in the spaces between the trees. I need to tell you about Lucas Pine and Thomas Ridge. I need to tell you what happened to them in the winter of 2019, deep in the largest temperate rainforest in North America, where the trees grow so thick that daylight becomes a memory and the silence has teeth. But to understand what happened to them, you need to understand what Tongass really is. 16.7 million acres of wilderness, most of it untouched by human hands, stretching across the southeastern Alaska panhandle like a dark green scar. The trees here are ancient, Sitka spruce and western hemlock that were saplings when Columbus sailed, their trunks wider than trucks, their branches creating a canopy so dense that even at noon the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. The understory is a tangle of devil's club and salmonberry, plants with thorns that tear through clothing and skin with equal ease. The ground is soft, centuries of decomposition creating a spongy carpet of moss and rotting wood that swallows sound, that muffles footsteps, that turns the forest into a place of profound and unsettling quiet. It was December when Lucas Pine arrived at the station, transferred from Olympic National Park in Washington. He was young, maybe 28, with that eager energy of someone who still believed ranger work was about helping people and protecting nature. He had dark hair that he kept too long, a ready smile, and a habit of humming while he worked. Thomas Ridge came a week later, a weathered man in his late 40s with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much. He had worked Denali for 15 years before requesting a transfer, though he never said why. The first time I saw Thomas, he was standing at the window of the ranger station, staring out at the forest with an expression I recognized because I wore it myself. Fear, masquerading as respect. Understanding that the wilderness was not neutral, not empty, but occupied by things older and stranger than our training manuals acknowledged. We were the only 3 rangers assigned to the northern sector that winter, responsible for 200,000 acres of forest that saw maybe a dozen hikers between November and March. Most of our job was maintenance, checking cabins and trails, monitoring weather stations, making sure the infrastructure survived the brutal Alaskan winter. It was lonely work, the kind that made men talk to themselves or spend too much time with a bottle. But it was necessary work, and someone had to do it. The first incident happened on December 18th. Lucas had gone out to check on the weather station at Moraine Creek, a 6-hour hike through dense forest. He was supposed to radio in when he arrived, do his readings, and radio again before heading back. The first call came through at 2 in the afternoon, his voice crackling with static but clear enough. Everything normal, equipment functioning, weather holding. The second call never came. By 6 p.m., with darkness settling over the forest like a burial shroud, Thomas and I were gearing up for a night search. We loaded our packs with emergency supplies, flares, medical equipment, enough gear to survive 3 days in the backcountry if we had to. I checked my rifle, a Remington 730-06, loaded with rounds that could stop a brown bear. Thomas carried a Winchester .338, even heavier firepower. We both carried sidearms as backup. Standard protocol for winter patrols in bear country, though we both knew the bears were mostly denned up this time of year, that the statistical danger from wildlife was minimal. But statistics are cold comfort when you are alone in the dark forest, and there are things in Tongass that do not appear in any wildlife management database. We followed Lucas's route, our headlamps cutting narrow tunnels through the darkness, the beams reflecting off a million water droplets suspended in the air. Tongass is a rainforest, and even in winter the humidity is oppressive, a wet cold that seeps into your bones and never quite leaves. Our breath formed clouds that hung in the still air. No wind, no sound except our boots on the trail and the occasional drip of water from the canopy above. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. Thomas stopped after the first hour, his hand raised in a signal I understood. Listen. We stood motionless, breathing through our noses, straining to hear anything unusual. But there was nothing, just that terrible, absolute silence. No owls, no voles scurrying through the underbrush, no branches creaking. In a healthy forest, there is always sound, always movement, the constant background noise of life continuing in the dark. This was different. This was the silence of prey animals hiding, of the forest holding its breath. We found Lucas's pack at the weather station, abandoned beside the equipment shelter. His radio was still clipped to the shoulder strap, turned on, functioning. His water bottles were there, his emergency supplies, his map, everything except Lucas. The weather station itself was undamaged, the readings recorded in his neat handwriting on the log sheet. The last entry was timed at 2:47 p.m. Whatever happened after he finished his work. Thomas found the tracks while I was examining the pack. They were in a muddy patch beside the creek, impressed deep into the soft earth. Not bear tracks, not wolf or moose or any animal that should have been in these woods. They were almost human, 5 distinct toes, but wrong. Too large, easily 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. The stride length between prints was impossible, over 7 feet. Whatever made these tracks was massive and bipedal and had followed Lucas from the weather station into the forest. I took photographs, using my hand for scale, trying to steady the camera despite the tremor in my fingers. Thomas knelt beside the prints, his flashlight beam tracing the outline. In the harsh white light, I could see his face had gone pale. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. "You know what these are?" I said, not a question. He nodded slowly, not looking at me. "Saw prints like this in Denali. That is why I transferred. Thought maybe they did not range this far south. I was wrong." "What are they?" "The Kushtaka," Thomas said quietly, using the Tlingit word. "Dogmen, the people who live between. That is what the locals call them. The native tribes have stories about them going back centuries, warnings about going into the forest alone, about respecting the boundaries. I thought they were just stories, folklore, until I found the first body." He stood up, his rifle in his hands, his eyes scanning the dark tree line. "We need to leave, now. If it took Lucas, he is already dead. If we stay here, we will be next." But I could not leave, not without knowing, not without finding some trace of Lucas beyond abandoned gear and impossible footprints. We followed the tracks into the forest, knowing it was stupid, knowing every instinct should be screaming at us to turn back. The tracks led away from the creek, deeper into the timber, following no trail, moving with purpose through terrain that would challenge an experienced hiker. Whatever made these prints move through the forest like it owned it, like the Devil's Club and Deadfall were no obstacle at all. We found the first marker 300 yards in. It was a tree, a massive Sitka spruce, and it had been marked with deep gouges in the bark. 4 parallel scratches running from about 9 feet up down to chest height, cutting through bark into the white wood beneath. The wounds were fresh, sap still weeping, the exposed wood pale in our flashlight beams. Thomas touched the marks with his fingers, measuring their width and depth. "Territorial markers," he said. "They do this to warn others away. We are in their territory now. We need to turn back." But the tracks continued, and I followed them, Thomas cursing behind me, but following anyway because rangers do not abandon each other, even when following leads to dark places. The tracks led us for another hour, winding through the forest, sometimes crossing frozen streams, sometimes climbing over massive fallen logs. And then they stopped. Just stopped, in the middle of a small clearing, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into the air. I swept my flashlight around the clearing, looking for any sign of where the tracks continued. Nothing. The forest pressed in on all sides, dark and impenetrable. Thomas was turning slowly, his rifle raised, his breathing harsh and quick. And then I smelled it. A thick, musky odor like wet dog mixed with rotting meat, so strong it made my eyes water. The smell seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere surrounding us. "Lucas!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice sounding small and desperate. "Lucas Pine, if you can hear me, make a sound." The response came not from Lucas, but from the forest itself. A vocalization, deep and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity. Not a roar or a howl, but something else, something that carried intelligence and intention. It came from the trees to our left, then was answered by another call from the right, then a third from behind us. We were surrounded. Thomas grabbed my arm, his grip painful through my jacket. "Run," he said. "Now." We ran, abandoning all pretense of search and rescue, abandoning protocol and training and professionalism. We ran like terrified children through the dark forest. Branches whipped our faces, roots grabbed at our boots, our packs bounced painfully against our backs. Behind us, I could hear movement, heavy footfalls that seemed to pace us, that could have overtaken us at any moment but did not. They were hurting us, I realized with cold terror, driving us like prey animals, controlling our direction, our speed, our panic. We burst out of the tree line onto the main trail, gasping for air, our legs burning. Thomas stumbled and fell, and I grabbed him, hauled him upright. We could still hear them in the forest, just out of sight, moving parallel to the trail. Those vocalizations continued, calling back and forth in what could only be communication. Language. They were coordinating. We made it back to the ranger station at 3 a.m, exhausted and terrified. I radioed headquarters in Juneau, reported Lucas missing, requested immediate search and rescue with helicopter support. The response was bureaucratic and unhurried. They would send a team at first light, weather permitting. In the meantime, we were to stay at the station, maintain our position, and wait for support. Thomas and I sat in the main room with all the lights on, our rifles loaded and ready, staring at the windows and seeing only our own frightened reflections staring back. Neither of us slept. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? That we had abandoned Lucas? That we had run from sounds in the forest? That we believed in creatures that officially did not exist? Dawn came with agonizing slowness, the darkness gradually fading to gray. The radio crackled to life at 7 a.m. Headquarters informing us that weather had grounded the helicopter. Dense fog, visibility near zero. The aerial search was postponed until conditions improved. A ground team would be assembled and sent out within 48 hours. 48 hours. Lucas had been missing for 13 hours already, and they were telling us to wait another 2 days. I wanted to argue, to demand immediate action, but Thomas put his hand on my shoulder and shook his head. He knew what I was beginning to understand, that Lucas was already gone, that sending more people into that forest would just create more victims. The fog persisted for 3 days, an unseasonable phenomenon that had the weather service baffled. Dense, cold, pressing against the station windows like a living thing. We were trapped, unable to conduct any meaningful search, unable to do anything but wait and listen to the forest and wonder what was out there in the white blindness. On the second night of the fog, Thomas told me what had happened in Denali. He had been part of a team investigating a missing hiker, a young woman who had failed to return from a solo trek. They found her camp intact, her gear undisturbed, no sign of struggle. Just footprints, the same impossible tracks we had seen at Moraine Creek. The team had split up to cover more ground, against protocol, but they were desperate. Thomas had been partnered with another ranger, a man named David Calhoun. They followed the tracks into a narrow valley, and that was where the creatures had ambushed them. Thomas's voice shook as he described it. 3 of them, massive and covered in dark hair, moving upright but hunched, their arms too long, their hands too large. They had come out of the trees with terrifying speed, no warning, just sudden violence. David had fired his rifle, hit one of them in the chest. The creature had staggered but not fallen, and its companions had reacted with rage. They took David, just grabbed him and carried him away while Thomas fired uselessly into the forest. He never saw David again. The official report said David had fallen into a crevasse, his body unrecoverable. Thomas had not argued with that assessment because who would believe the truth? "They are intelligent," Thomas said, staring into his coffee mug. "More intelligent than we want to admit. They plan, they coordinate, they recognize threats and eliminate them. And they have been here longer than us, Marcus. This is their forest. We are the intruders." On the morning of the 4th day, the fog lifted as suddenly as it had arrived. Headquarters scrambled a helicopter, and a 6-person search and rescue team flew in from Juneau. They were professional, efficient, asking the right questions, taking our statements. They examined the photographs I had taken of the footprints, made appropriate noises about possible bear tracks or hoaxes. They hiked out to Moraine Creek with us trailing behind, found Lucas's abandoned pack exactly where we had left it. And they found nothing else. The footprints were gone, erased by 3 days of rain and fog. The territorial markers on the trees had been obscured by fresh mud and moss, as if the forest had deliberately hidden the evidence. We spent 2 days searching in expanding grid patterns, calling Lucas's name, finding nothing. No body, no blood, no trace beyond that abandoned pack. The official conclusion was that Lucas had encountered a brown bear, fought or fled, and succumbed to injuries and exposure somewhere in the wilderness. His body would likely be found in the spring when the snow melted, scavenged beyond recognition. It was a neat explanation, one that fit the paperwork and closed the case. They took my photographs of the footprints as evidence but filed them under inconclusive. Possible bear tracks, possibly fabricated. Definitely not the massive bipedal creature I knew had made them. Thomas requested an immediate transfer the day after the search was called off. His request was granted with suspicious speed, as if headquarters was eager to remove someone who might ask uncomfortable questions. He was reassigned to a fire lookout tower in Montana, isolated duty with minimal human contact. The last time I spoke with him, the night before he left, he gave me a piece of advice. "Do not go into the deep forest alone," he said. "Do not investigate strange sounds. Do not follow unknown tracks. And if you see them, if you actually see them, do not try to fight. Just run, and do not look back, because they can kill you anytime they want. The only reason you are alive is because they choose to let you live." He left the next morning, and I never saw him again. I learned later he had quit the Park Service entirely 6 months after the Montana transfer, moved to Phoenix, as far from forests as he could get. I do not blame him. I should have left too. Should have requested a transfer, taken a desk job, gotten out of Tongass while I still could. But I did not. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was guilt over Lucas, a need to understand what had happened to him. Whatever the reason, I stayed. Through that winter and into spring, through summer and the next winter. I stayed, and I watched, and I learned. I learned that the Tlingit people would not go into certain parts of the forest, would not even discuss them with outsiders. I learned that there were patterns to the disappearances, clusters of missing persons in specific areas that shifted over the years, as if something was patrolling a territory. I learned to recognize the signs, the territorial markers on trees, the twisted vegetation where something large had passed, the absolute silence that meant predators were near. And the smell, always that musky, rotten smell that preceded their presence. I saw them 3 more times over the next 2 years. Never close, always at a distance, always at dusk or dawn when the light was uncertain. Massive shapes moving through the trees, upright and purposeful, watching me, evaluating me, deciding, each time, to let me live. I never raised my rifle, never called out. I just watched, and they watched back. And then they melted into the forest and were gone. The second disappearance happened in October of 2020. A hiker named Jennifer Marquez, 34 years old, experienced outdoors woman, well-equipped and knowledgeable. She was solo hiking the coastal trail, had checked in with the ranger station as required, was due to complete her trek in 4 days. She never arrived at her destination. We found her camp on the 3rd day, tent intact. Food properly stored in a bear canister. Her boots were beside the tent, neatly placed, as if she had taken them off to sleep. But Jennifer was gone. No struggle, no blood, no tracks except those impossible 18-inch prints circling her camp like a predator evaluating prey. I did not call in search and rescue immediately. Instead, I followed the tracks alone, knowing it was against protocol, knowing it was dangerous, but needing to understand. They led away from the coast, inland, toward the deep forest where the trees grew so thick that GPS signals faltered and compass needles spun uncertainly. I followed for 6 hours, the tracks always clear, always purposeful, until I reached a place I had never been before. It was a valley, narrow and steep-sided, with a creek running through the center. The trees here were ancient, some of them 15 feet in diameter, their tops lost in mist, and the valley was marked. Every tree had those 4-line gouges, some old and scarred over, some fresh and weeping sap. This was territory, claimed and defended, and at the far end of the valley, partially hidden by ferns and moss, I saw what looked like a cave entrance. I should have turned back then, should have radioed for backup, reported what I had found, let someone else investigate, but I did not. I approached the cave slowly, my rifle raised, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The entrance was large, maybe 8 feet high and 6 feet wide, opening into darkness. The smell hit me before I was within 20 feet. That musky rot smell amplified 100 times, so strong I gagged. I clicked on my flashlight, aimed the beam into the cave, and I saw them. Bones. Human bones mixed with animal bones, piled against the walls, some of them fresh with bits of tissue still attached, others old and yellowed with age. Skulls, some human, some not, arranged in patterns that suggested meaning, intention. This was not a den. This was a burial site, a place of significance, and I had just violated it. The vocalization came from behind me, so close I felt it in my chest. I spun around, rifle raised, and there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, not 30 feet away. Massive does not adequately describe it. 8.5 feet tall at least, maybe taller, shoulders broader than any human or ape I had ever seen, covered in dark brown hair, matted and thick. The arms hung past its knees, ending in hands that were almost human but too large, the fingers too long. The head was cone-shaped, the face flat and broad with a wide nose and a lipless mouth. But it was the eyes that froze me, amber yellow, intelligent, staring at me with an awareness that was undeniably conscious, undeniably aware of what I was and what I was doing here. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could see it breathing, see the muscles moving under its skin, see the intelligence calculating behind those eyes. My finger was on the trigger, 15 pounds of pressure away from firing a round that would probably just make it angry. This thing could cover 30 feet in seconds, could tear me apart before I got off a second shot. I was dead if it decided I was a threat. It tilted its head, an eerily human gesture of curiosity. Then it made a sound, lower and quieter than the vocalizations I had heard before, almost conversational, not threatening, not aggressive, just communicating something I had no hope of understanding. And then it turned and walked away, moving into the forest with a grace and silence that should have been impossible for something so large. I stood there, frozen, for a long time after it left. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. The rifle felt useless in my hands. I had just come face to face with something that should not exist, something official science denied, and it had looked at me and decided I was not worth killing. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt judged and found wanting. I backed away from the cave, never taking my eyes off the forest, expecting at any moment for it to return with others, to finish what it had started. But nothing happened. I made it back to the trail, back to the ranger station, and only then did I allow myself to collapse, to sit on the floor with my head in my hands and try to process what I had just experienced. I never reported finding the cave, never told anyone about the face-to-face encounter. What would I say? That I had found a burial site full of human remains and been confronted by a cryptid that official policy said did not exist? I would be removed from duty, probably sent for psychiatric evaluation, definitely never allowed to work in the field again. So I stayed silent. Added another secret to the growing list of things I knew but could not speak about. Jennifer Marquez was never found. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. Her family held a memorial service. The case was closed, and I carried the knowledge that she was probably in that cave, her bones added to the pile, her disappearance becoming another statistic in the long list of people who walked into Tongass National Forest and never walked out. The winter of 2021 was harsh, even by Alaska standards. Record snowfall, temperatures dropping to -30, storms that shut down all access to the backcountry for weeks at a time. I was alone at the northern sector station, all other rangers reassigned or on leave. Just me and 16 million acres of frozen wilderness and the things that lived in it. I started having dreams, not nightmares exactly, but vivid recurring dreams where I was walking through the forest and they were walking beside me, dozens of them, moving through the trees like shadows. In the dreams, they were not hunting me. They were showing me something, leading me deeper into the wilderness towards something I needed to see. I would wake from these dreams covered in sweat, my heart racing, the smell of that musky rot thick in my nostrils despite being inside a heated building. The dreams intensified as winter progressed, becoming more vivid, more urgent. I started to feel like I was being called, summoned, pulled towards something I could not name. It was crazy. I knew it was crazy, but I also knew that these creatures were real, that they had intelligence and intention, and that they had allowed me to live when they could have easily killed me. Maybe they wanted something. Maybe they were trying to communicate something important. In February, during a break in the weather, I made a decision that was probably the stupidest thing I have ever done. I packed a heavy winter kit, loaded my rifle, and headed into the deep forest, alone, in the middle of winter, following a compulsion I barely understood toward a destination I could not name. If I had told anyone what I was doing, they would have stopped me, committed me, done whatever it took to prevent me from going. so I told no one. Just left a note at the station saying I was conducting a routine equipment check, expected back in 3 days. I followed my compass southeast toward the heart of Tongass, areas that appeared on the map but had no trails, no markers, nothing but contour lines indicating mountains and valleys that had probably never been seen by human eyes. The snow was deep, sometimes waist deep, exhausting to trudge through. But I kept going, driven by something I could not explain, following instincts I did not know I had. On the second day, I found tracks. Not the massive bipedal tracks I had seen before, but smaller ones, maybe 12 inches long, moving in a line through the snow. Juvenile tracks, I realized. Young ones. I followed them carefully, my rifle ready, knowing that where there were young, there would be adults nearby, protective and dangerous. The tracks led me to a valley I had never seen before, hidden between 2 ridges, accessible only through a narrow gap in the rock. And in that valley, I saw them. Not 1 or 2, but dozens. Maybe 50 or 60 individuals, ranging from juveniles barely 4 feet tall to massive adults that dwarfed the one I had seen at the cave. They had built structures, lean-tos made from branches and moss, arranged in a rough circle around a central area. Smoke rose from what looked like controlled fires. I could see them moving around the settlement, some carrying wood, others working on what might have been tools or weapons. Children, or what passed for children, played in the snow under the watchful eyes of adults. I was looking at a village, a society, a culture that had existed here, hidden and secret, for God knows how long. They had language. I could hear them vocalizing to each other, complex sounds that clearly carried meaning. They had fire, shelter, social structure. They were not animals. They were people. Different from us, but undeniably people. And they knew I was there. One of the adults, a massive male with graying hair, turned and looked directly at me despite the fact that I was hidden in the tree line 200 yards away. He made a sound, a loud call, and immediately the entire settlement reacted. Juveniles were herded into the shelters. Adults moved to the perimeter, forming a defensive line, but they did not attack, did not charge, just stood there, watching, waiting. I raised my hands, showing I was not holding my rifle, trying to communicate that I meant no harm. It felt absurd, like a scene from a bad science fiction movie, but I did not know what else to do. The gray-haired male watched me for a long moment, then made another sound, softer this time. Some of the defensive line relaxed, though they continued to watch me. I stayed there for hours, just watching, trying to understand what I was seeing. They went about their business, though clearly aware of my presence. I saw what might have been food preparation, an adult female working with some kind of plant material. I saw tool use, a juvenile using a rock to crack open what looked like frozen shellfish. I saw social grooming, adults picking through each other's fur. I saw everything that anthropologists look for as markers of culture and intelligence. As the sun began to set, the gray-haired male approached the tree line where I stood. He stopped about 50 feet away, well out of rifle range, and looked at me. Really looked at me, with an intensity that made me feel like I was being read, understood, evaluated. Then he did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. He picked up a rock, walked a few steps forward, and placed it on the snow between us. Then he backed away, still watching me. I understood what he was doing. He was initiating trade, or communication, or some kind of exchange. Offering a gift maybe, or testing to see if I understood the gesture. I pulled a protein bar from my pack, unwrapped it, and placed it on the snow next to his rock. Then I backed away, giving him space. He approached slowly, picked up the protein bar, examined it with surprising delicacy given his massive hands, and then carefully unwrapped it. He sniffed it, took a small bite, chewed thoughtfully. Then he nodded, another eerily human gesture, and placed something beside the rock. It looked like a carved piece of bone, intricate patterns etched into the surface. He backed away again. I approached cautiously, picked up the bone carving. It was beautiful, clearly the work of skilled hands, the patterns geometric and deliberate. Art. He had given me art. I held it up so he could see I appreciated it, then carefully placed it in my pack. I wanted to stay longer, to try to establish more communication, to learn more about these people. But darkness was falling, and I knew staying the night would be pushing my luck. They had tolerated my presence during the day, but night was their time, and I was still very much an outsider. I backed away slowly, moving toward the gap in the ridges. The gray-haired male watched me go, made one final vocalization that sounded almost like farewell, then turned and walked back to his settlement. I hiked through the night, using my headlamp and GPS to navigate, driven by excitement and terror in equal measure. I had just made first contact with an unknown intelligent species. I had evidence, physical evidence, in the form of that carved bone. This was the most significant discovery in modern anthropology, possibly in human history, and I could never tell anyone about it. Because if I did, if I revealed the location of that valley, what would happen? Researchers would descend on it. Film crews, scientists, curious tourists, hunters looking for trophies. The government would get involved, maybe the military. These people, these forest people who had managed to survive in secret for centuries, would be exposed, studied, possibly captured or killed. Their hidden society would be destroyed by human curiosity and greed. Thomas had been right. This was their forest. They had been here first. And the only reason I was alive, the only reason I had been allowed to see their settlement, was because they chose to reveal it to me. They could have killed me at any point, easily, but instead they had welcomed me, cautiously, conditionally, as a guest in their territory. I could not betray that trust, so I buried the evidence. Literally, I hiked to a remote location, dug a hole, and buried the carved bone along with my photographs and notes about what I had seen. I marked the location on a private GPS unit, but I never went back. That evidence sits there still, slowly rotting in the permafrost, my insurance policy, and my secret shame. The rest of the winter passed quietly. I saw signs of their presence occasionally, tracks in the snow, territorial markers on trees, but no more direct contact. Spring came, and with it the seasonal rangers and the hiking tourists and the busyness that made secrets easier to keep. I went through the motions of my job, maintained the trails, helped lost hikers, filed reports, and never mentioned the things I knew lurked in the deep forest. Summer of 2022 brought another disappearance. A man named Robert Chen, 41 years old, experienced mountaineer, climbing alone in the coastal range. He had proper equipment, filed a proper route plan, took all the correct precautions. He was due back on a Wednesday. He did not return. The search and rescue team found his base camp intact, his rope and climbing gear neatly coiled, his tent properly staked, and those tracks, circling his camp, 18-inch prints in the muddy ground. I knew what had happened. The same thing that had happened to Lucas, to Jennifer, to dozens of others over the years. He had gone too far, seen too much, been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they had taken him. Not as food, I did not think they were cannibals, but as a threat eliminated, a security breach contained. I did not join the search. Claimed illness, let the other rangers handle it. I could not stand to be part of another charade, another official search for someone I knew would never be found. Robert Chen was declared dead after 2 weeks. His family held a memorial. The file was closed. Life continued. But something had changed in me. The weight of the secrets, the knowledge of what was really happening in these forests, the guilt of staying silent while people died, it was crushing me. I started drinking more, sleeping less. The dreams intensified, not calling me this time, but accusing me. In them, Lucas and Jennifer and Robert stood in a line, staring at me with dead eyes, asking why I had not warned them, why I had let them walk into the forest unaware. I knew I could not continue like this, could not keep serving a system that sent people into danger while refusing to acknowledge the danger existed. I had 3 choices: quit like Thomas had, speak out like Morrison apparently tried to, or find some way to live with the knowledge while still trying to protect people. I chose a compromise that probably satisfies no one. I started keeping a journal, documenting every incident, every sighting, every piece of evidence I encountered. I took photographs, collected samples, made detailed notes, not to publish, not to prove anything to skeptics, but to create a record, so that if something happened to me, if I disappeared like Lucas or Jennifer, there would be evidence. Someone would find my journal and understand what happened. And I started warning people, unofficially, quietly, in ways that could not be traced back to me. I would mention to hikers planning backcountry trips that certain areas had unusual wildlife activity, that they should stick to established trails, that going alone was never advisable. I would emphasize the dangers of the wilderness, exaggerate the risks from bears and wolves, anything to make people cautious. Some listened. Some thought I was being paranoid or overprotective, but a few took my warnings seriously, changed their plans, stayed safe. It was not enough. Could never be enough. But it was something. A small rebellion against the official silence, against the policy that prioritized secrecy over human life. In September 2023, I finally received my answer about Thomas Ridge. An email from an address I did not recognize, unsigned, brief. It said simply, Thomas Ridge died on August 14th. Suicide. He couldn't live with what he knew anymore. Don't make the same mistake. No explanation of how the sender knew me, knew about Thomas, knew about any of this. But I believed it. Thomas had finally found his escape from the nightmares, the guilt, the knowledge. I attended his memorial service in Phoenix. His sister was there, confused about why her brother had changed so much after leaving the Park Service, why he had become so reclusive and paranoid in his final years. I wanted to tell her the truth, to explain that Thomas had not been crazy or weak, that he had seen things that would break anyone. But I stayed silent. Added Thomas to the list of casualties, people destroyed not by the forest people directly, but by the simple fact of knowing they existed. The breaking point came in November 2023. A family, the Hendersons, came to the ranger station planning a week-long camping trip in a remote area of the forest. Parents, 2 teenage children, all experienced outdoors people, properly equipped. The father showed me their planned route, and I recognized immediately that it would take them directly through territory I knew was actively occupied. I tried to redirect them, suggested alternative locations, emphasized the dangers, but they were set on their plan, had researched the area extensively, believed they could handle it. I could have forbidden it. As the senior ranger on duty, I had the authority to close certain areas for safety reasons. But doing so would require justification, paperwork, official documentation. And I could not document the real reason, could not write closed due to territorial primates on a Forest Service form. So I let them go, with warnings they dismissed, with fears I could not articulate, and I hated myself for it. They never came back. All 4 of them, gone. The search team found their camp intact, food properly stored, no signs of struggle. Just those tracks, dozens of them, surrounding the camp like a siege. The official report said probable bear attack, bodies carried off and scavenged. The case was closed within a month. 4 people, a whole family, erased from existence, and the official response was a file folder in a cabinet in Juneau. That night, I sat in the ranger station with my service pistol in my hand, seriously contemplating following Thomas's example. The weight of the secrets, the guilt, the complicity in deaths I could have prevented if only I had been willing to sacrifice my career, my credibility, my comfortable silence. It would have been easy, quick, an end to the nightmares and the knowledge. But I did not do it, not out of courage or strength, but out of spite. Someone needed to remember. Someone needed to keep the record. If I died, if all the rangers who knew the truth died or disappeared, then the secret would be complete. The forest people could continue their existence in perfect obscurity, and people would continue to disappear, and nothing would ever change. So I lived. I put the gun away, poured the whiskey down the sink, and made a decision. I would stay in Tongass. I would continue my job. I would document everything. And when I finally could not take it anymore, when the weight became truly unbearable, I would not kill myself. I would walk into the deep forest, into their territory, and I would force a confrontation. Either they would kill me, ending my torment, or they would communicate with me, give me understanding, maybe even permission to tell the truth. Until then, I carry the knowledge, I carry the guilt, I carry the memory of Lucas Pine's eager smile and Thomas Ridge's haunted eyes, and the Henderson family's photographs showing their excited faces, unaware they were about to become statistics. I carry it all, because someone has to, because the alternative is forgetting, and forgetting feels like a betrayal of everyone who was lost. It is December 2024 now, 5 years since Lucas disappeared. The database shows 42 missing persons in all Alaska's national forests since 1980, but I have access to the old paper files, the records from before digital systems, before standardized reporting. Those files tell a different story. 479 people missing in Tongass alone since 1980. Most attributed to accidents, exposure, bear attacks, getting lost. All officially explainable. All conveniently matching the narrative that our forests are dangerous but understandable places where risks can be quantified and managed. But someone has been deleting the digital records. Someone in the Forest Service, or the Park Service, or some other agency has been systematically removing the older cases from the official database, making the problem appear smaller than it is, hiding the patterns that emerge when you look at all the data together. I do not know who. I do not know why, though I can guess. Acknowledging the true scope of the disappearances would require acknowledging that something we do not understand is killing people in our national forests. It would require investigation, explanation, potentially closing large areas to public access. It would require admitting that we do not control these places as thoroughly as we claim. So the records get deleted, the patterns get obscured, and people keep walking into the forest unaware. I am writing this account not because I expect anyone to believe me. Most will not. They will say I am traumatized, paranoid, fabricating stories to cope with the normal tragedies that occur in wilderness areas. They will point to the lack of bodies, the lack of physical evidence, the absence of any credible scientific documentation of these creatures. They will dismiss the eyewitness accounts, the footprints, the vocalizations, all the accumulated evidence that something unknown inhabits our forests. Let them dismiss it. I am writing this for the few who will listen, who will recognize the truth when they hear it, who will understand that the wilderness is not empty, not safe, not fully known. I am writing this for the next ranger who encounters something they cannot explain, who sees those amber eyes staring from the darkness and realizes they are not alone in the forest. I am writing this so they know they are not crazy, not the first, not alone in their knowledge, and I am writing this as a warning. If you go into Tongass National Forest or any of the great wilderness areas of North America, understand what you are risking. Stick to the trails. Never go alone. Respect the boundaries that local people will tell you about if you ask the right questions. And if you see signs, territorial markers on trees, massive footprints, areas of unnatural silence, turn back. Do not investigate. Do not try to prove anything. Just leave. Because they have been here longer than us, they understand this environment in ways we never will, and they are willing to kill to protect their secrecy. Lucas Pine was 28 years old when he disappeared. He wanted to make a difference, to protect the wilderness, to help people. The forest took him, and barely anyone remembers his name. Thomas Ridge was a good man, an experienced ranger, and the knowledge destroyed him from the inside until he could not bear it anymore. The Henderson family was just trying to have an adventure together, to experience the beauty of nature, and they paid for that desire with their lives. I am still here, still carrying the secrets, still watching the forest and knowing what watches back. I do not know how much longer I can do this. The weight grows heavier each year, the nightmares more vivid, the guilt more crushing. But I will continue as long as I can, because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to keep the record. Someone needs to warn those few who will listen. My name is Marcus Webb. They call me the Black Ranger. And I am telling you the truth about what lives in the deep forests of Tongass, in the spaces between the trees, in the valleys that do not appear on maps. They are real, they are intelligent, they are dangerous, and they are watching, always watching. The silence in the forest is not empty, it is full of eyes. I am Creyson Henry Ashford Raveneye, and I've escorted 3 separate families out of the Badlands after their children started speaking in perfect unison, describing things that happened here in 1873. The children never remembered anything afterward. I remember everything. My posting at Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois started like any other assignment: routine patrols, trail maintenance, the occasional lost hiker. The forest sprawls across 280,000 acres of hardwood hills and limestone bluffs, cut through by the Ohio River on one side and riddled with caves and sinkholes that drop into darkness without warning. Beautiful country, ancient country, the kind of place where you can feel the weight of centuries pressing down on you when you stand among the old oaks and hickories that have watched this land longer than any human settlement. I'd been a ranger for 14 years before Shawnee, working my way through smaller parks in Oklahoma and Missouri. I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. I was catastrophically wrong. The trouble started my second week when I met Ranger Thomas Whitfield during the shift handover. Thomas was 63 years old, weathered as the limestone cliffs he'd been patrolling for the past 32 years. He had the look of a man who'd stopped sleeping properly a long time ago. eyes perpetually shadowed, hands that trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching, a habit of checking over his shoulder even when we were inside the well-lit ranger station. He pulled me aside after the briefing, away from the other rangers, and walked me to a map mounted on the wall of the equipment room. His finger traced a line through the forest, following what appeared to be a natural ridge that ran roughly north to south through the eastern section of the park. "This is the divide," he said quietly. His voice had a rasp to it, like he'd spent too many years breathing in smoke. "On the maps, it doesn't have a name, but everyone who's worked here long enough knows it. East of this ridge, you follow standard protocols. West of it, especially in the Garden of the Gods area and beyond, you never go alone. You never go after dark, and if you see something that doesn't make sense, you don't investigate. You mark it, you report it, and you let it be." I studied the map, trying to understand what he was telling me. The western section he'd indicated included some of the most popular hiking areas in Shawnee. The Garden of the Gods with its stunning rock formations, the river bluffs, several major trail systems. It seemed insane to suggest avoiding it. "Thomas," I said carefully, "what exactly am I supposed to be watching for?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the map. Then he said, "Shawnee sits on old land, Crescent. The Shawnee people knew it. Before them, the Mississippians knew it. There are mound sites throughout this forest that date back 1,000 years. The tribes built them deliberately, marking boundaries, warning zones. We just built our trails right over them and pretended the warnings didn't matter." "That sounds like folklore," I said, trying to keep my tone respectful. Thomas looked at me with those haunted eyes. "In 3 months, you'll understand. I used to think like you do." Then I lost my partner, David Kern, to the western section. 26 years ago, this October. We were tracking a missing hiker past Pounds Hollow. David went ahead to check a cave opening. I heard him call out that he'd found something. Then silence. When I reached the cave 5 minutes later, David was gone. No tracks leading out. No sign of struggle. Just his flashlight on the ground, still on, pointing into the cave. The batteries ran for 3 more hours before dying. I sat outside that cave the whole time, calling his name. He never answered. We searched for 2 weeks. Never found a trace. What do you think happened to him? Thomas's jaw tightened. I think he crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. I think something in these woods is older than our understanding, and it doesn't like being disturbed. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And I think David is still out there, still in the forest, just not in a way we can recognize anymore. I didn't know what to say to that. Thomas must have seen the skepticism on my face because he shook his head and turned away. "You'll see," he said. "Everyone who stays here long enough sees. Then you'll have to decide whether you're going to file honest reports or whether you're going to lie like the rest of us. Because if we told the truth about what happens in Shawnee, they'd shut the whole forest down or call us insane. Maybe both." He left me standing there, staring at the map, trying to convince myself that he was just an old ranger who'd spent too much time alone in the woods, that what happened to his partner was a tragic accident, nothing more, that there was a rational explanation for everything. I managed to believe that for exactly 19 days. The call came in on a Wednesday afternoon. Family of 4, parents and 2 children, ages 7 and 9, had gone hiking on the observation trail in the Garden of the Gods area. They'd checked in at the trailhead at 9 in the morning, expecting a 3-hour hike. By 2 in the afternoon, they hadn't returned. By 4, when I got the call, we were mobilizing a search. I went out with 3 other rangers. Sarah Blackwood, a competent woman in her 40s who'd worked Shawnee for 8 years. Miguel Torres, a newer ranger like myself, only 6 months on the job. And Thomas Whitfield, who insisted on coming despite being officially off duty. When Thomas heard the location, his face went gray. "That's west of the divide," he said. "That's deep in the wrong territory. We have to find them," I said. "It's a family with young children." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. Just remember what I told you. Stay together. Don't investigate anything unusual. Get them and get out." We reached the trailhead around 4:30. The family's car was still in the parking area, doors locked, no sign of disturbance. We split into 2 teams, Sarah and Miguel taking the main trail, Thomas and I taking the alternate route that looped through the rock formations. We'd converge at the observation point and work our way back if we hadn't found them. The afternoon light was already failing, filtered through the dense canopy of oak and hickory. The trail wound through massive sandstone formations, carved by wind and water into fantastic shapes. Mushroom rocks, pillars, natural arches. In normal circumstances, it was breathtaking. Now, with the sun dropping toward the horizon and shadows lengthening between the rocks, it felt oppressive. Wrong. Thomas moved with practiced caution, checking signs, looking for disturbed ground or broken branches. I followed his lead, trying to see what he saw. After about 20 minutes, he stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first, nothing but normal forest sounds, wind through leaves, distant bird calls, our own breathing. Then I caught it, a sound like singing. Children's voices, high and clear, coming from somewhere off the trail to our west. "That might be them," I said, starting toward the sound. Thomas grabbed my arm. "Wait, listen to what they're singing." I focused on the voices. They were singing something, but the words were strange. Not English, not any language I recognized. The melody was simple, repetitive, almost hypnotic, and there was something wrong about the timing. The voices were too perfectly synchronized, hitting every note with mechanical precision. "Children don't sing like that," Thomas said quietly. "That's not natural harmony. That's unison. Perfect, impossible unison." The singing stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard movement in the underbrush. Something large, moving through the forest parallel to our position. Thomas unslung his radio and keyed it. "Sarah? Miguel? Do you copy?" Static. He tried again. Nothing but white noise. "We need to get back to the trail junction," Thomas said. "We need to regroup with the others. But the family could be anywhere, and we won't help them by getting lost ourselves. Move, Crescent." We backtracked toward the main trail, moving quickly but carefully. The singing started up again, closer now. Multiple voices, maybe a dozen, all singing in that same perfect unison. The melody was maddening in its repetition, burrowing into my head like an earworm I couldn't shake. We rounded a bend in the trail and found the first sign of the family. A child's backpack, pink with cartoon characters on it, lying in the middle of the path. Thomas approached it cautiously, using a stick to flip it open. Inside were the usual items: water bottle, snacks, a small stuffed animal. But there was something else. A piece of paper, folded carefully, placed on top of the other contents. Thomas pulled out gloves and carefully extracted the paper. He unfolded it, and I saw his face go pale. He handed it to me without a word. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, done in crayon. It showed the Garden of the Gods rock formations, recognizable by their distinctive shapes. But between the rocks, the child had drawn figures. Tall, impossibly thin figures with arms that reached down to the ground and heads that were wrong. Too large, too elongated, too empty. At the bottom of the page, in careful printing, were the words, "They showed us the old ones." "That's not possible," I whispered. "How could a child draw this?" Thomas's voice was hollow. "The children speak first. The young ones are more sensitive to it. They see things we've trained ourselves not to see." His hand was shaking as he carefully refolded the paper. "We need to find this family now, Creason, before nightfall. After dark, we won't be able to help them." We pressed on, the singing voices following us through the forest. The trail opened onto a clearing where several massive rock formations created a natural amphitheater. And there, in the center of the clearing, we found them. The family was standing in a perfect circle, facing outward, mother, father, and two young daughters, all absolutely motionless. Their eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Their mouths moved in silent synchronization, forming words I couldn't hear. As we approached, I realized they were breathing in unison too. One long inhalation, held for 10 seconds, then a slow exhale, like a single organism operating 4 bodies. Thomas stopped me before I could get closer. "Don't touch them yet. Look at the ground." I looked down and felt my stomach drop. Around the family, someone, or something, had arranged stones in concentric circles. Not recent stones either. These were ancient, covered in moss and lichen, inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. They looked like they'd been there for centuries, but I knew for a fact this clearing had been empty when I'd hiked through it during my orientation 3 weeks ago. Thomas pulled out his camera and started documenting everything. His movements were mechanical, practiced, like he'd done this before. All the while, the family stood motionless in their circle, breathing together, mouths moving in silent unison. We need to break the circle, I said. Get them out of there. Thomas shook his head. Not yet. If we disrupt it wrong, we could make things worse. He circled the formation slowly, taking photos from every angle. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a gap in the stone circles, barely visible, where two stones sat slightly farther apart than the others. There, he said. That's the door. We go in through there, we guide them out the same way. Don't step on the stones. Don't disturb the pattern. We moved carefully into the circle through the gap. Up close, the family looked even worse. Their skin was pale, almost translucent. Their eyes had a glassy quality, like they were looking at something very far away. The mother's lips were moving, and I could just barely hear what she was saying. The old ones are hungry. The old ones are waiting. The old ones remember when this was all theirs. Over and over, the same words. The father was saying the same thing. So were the children, their young voices forming the words with disturbing clarity. Thomas positioned himself in front of the father while I took the mother. On 3, he said. We're going to grab them and walk them straight out through the gap. Don't deviate from the path. Ready? I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. 1, 2, 3. We each took hold of our assigned person and started walking them backward toward the gap. The moment we touched them, their eyes snapped to focus on us, all 4 of them, simultaneously. And they smiled. Not happy smiles. Something else. Something that made my skin crawl. You've seen them, the father said in a voice that didn't sound quite like his own. You've seen the old ones. They remember you now, Ranger Whitfield. They've been waiting for you to come back. Thomas's face went white, but he kept moving, kept pulling the father toward the gap. I did the same with the mother, who had turned her smile on me. They'll show you too, she said sweetly. They show everyone eventually. The ones who stay long enough. The ones who look too closely. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Your friend is already in the trees, Ranger Whitfield. He's been watching you for 26 years. We got them through the gap in the stone circle. The moment we crossed that threshold, the family collapsed. All 4 of them, dropping like puppets with cut strings. Thomas and I barely caught them before they hit the ground. The children started crying immediately, confused and terrified. The parents were disoriented, had no memory of how they'd gotten to this clearing or how long they'd been standing there. The last thing they remembered was starting the hike that morning. We got them back to the trailhead as fast as we could. Sarah and Miguel were there, having circled back when they lost radio contact. We loaded the family into a ranger vehicle, and I rode with them to the nearest hospital in Harrisburg while Thomas stayed to secure the area. The doctors found nothing wrong with any of them. No drugs in their system, no signs of trauma, no neurological abnormalities. Just a family that had somehow lost 6 hours of their lives in Shawnee National Forest with no memory of what happened. The parents were shaken but insisted they were fine. They wanted to go home, to forget the whole thing. But the youngest daughter, the 7-year-old, grabbed my hand before they left. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her face and said, "The tall ones wanted us to give you a message. They said to tell the Rangers that the divide is getting smaller. Soon there won't be any safe side. Soon it will all be their land again." I drove back to Shawnee in the dark, her words echoing in my head. Thomas was waiting for me at the station, sitting alone in the equipment room with a bottle of whiskey and that same map of the forest spread out in front of him. I sat down across from him. "Tell me everything," I said. So he did. He told me about the other incidents over his 32 years at Shawnee. The hikers who'd been found miles from where they'd vanished, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. The search parties that had reported seeing figures in the trees, tall, impossibly thin figures that vanished when approached. The caves where compasses spun uselessly and GPS signals died. The places where grown men refused to go after dark, even veteran rangers who'd spent decades in the wilderness. He told me about the mounds, the ancient earthworks built by the Mississippian culture 1,000 years ago. How they dotted the western section of Shawnee in patterns that didn't match any known settlement or burial practice. How archaeologists who'd tried to excavate them had quit the projects, citing equipment failures and bad feelings they couldn't quite explain. He told me about the dreams, how every ranger who'd worked Shawnee long enough started having them. Dreams of walking through the forest at night, led by singing voices, dreams of standing in circles of stone while something ancient and patient examined them. Dreams of trees that weren't trees, of caves that led somewhere they shouldn't, of a time before humans, when things older and stranger had dominion over this land. And he told me about David Kern, his missing partner, how David had been a skeptic like me, how he'd laughed at the warnings and the stories, how he'd gone into that cave confident in his rationality and his training, and how Thomas had sat outside that cave for 3 hours, listening to David scream. Not with pain, not with fear, but with something else, with ecstasy, with revelation, with the sound of a mind breaking open to accommodate something it was never meant to comprehend. The screaming stopped, Thomas said, his voice flat, and I knew I should go in there, should try to save him, but I couldn't make myself move, couldn't make myself cross that threshold, because I knew if I went in, I wouldn't come out, not as myself. So you just left him? I reported it. Full search team went in the next day. The cave was empty. No sign of David. No sign of anything. Just limestone walls and a passage that went back about 50 feet and ended in a wall. Dead end. But I know what I heard. David was in there for 3 hours, and whatever happened to him happened in a cave that officially doesn't go anywhere. I looked at the map, at the line Thomas had drawn through Shawnee. What is the divide, really? What's the difference between east and west? Thomas refilled his glass. East is what we think forests are supposed to be. Trees, animals, ecosystem, normal. West is what forests were before we showed up, before we imposed our understanding on them. Out there, the old rules still apply. The rules that existed before humans decided nature was something to be managed and controlled. That doesn't make sense. Thomas smiled, but there was no humor in it. Nothing about this makes sense, Creason. That's the point. We try to make the wilderness fit our frameworks, our scientific understanding, our neat categories. But Shawnee doesn't fit. Never has. The indigenous peoples knew it. They built their mounds as warnings, as barriers, as treaties with something that was here first. We just bulldozed over those warnings and pretended they didn't matter. He stood up, rolling up the map. You'll have to decide what to do with this information. You can do what most rangers do. File the official reports, keep your head down, and try not to think too hard about the things that don't make sense. Or you can do what I'm doing. Document everything. Maintain the boundaries we can maintain. Try to keep people safe while knowing we don't really understand what we're protecting them from. I chose documentation. Over the next 3 months, I kept detailed notes on every incident in Shawnee. I photographed the stone circles we found in various clearings, always arranged in the same pattern, always around the remains of campfires that were far too old to have been lit by modern hikers. I documented the reports of singing voices, of figures in the trees, of time distortions where hours would pass in what felt like minutes. And I escorted those 3 families out of the Badlands after their children started speaking in unison, describing events from 1873 in perfect detail. The children never remembered it afterward, but I did. I remembered every word. They described a massacre that had happened at a settlement called Devil's Backbone Ridge, a place that didn't appear on any modern maps. They described it from the perspective of something watching from the trees, something that had been there long before the settlers and would be there long after. Something that had observed the violence with patient interest, had collected the screaming and the dying, had added it all to some vast repository of human suffering it had been accumulating for millennia. The 3rd family broke me. Their daughter, a 9-year-old named Emma, looked at me with eyes that reflected no light and said in a voice not quite her own, "You're in their records now, Ranger Raveneye. You've been documented, measured, assessed. They're deciding what to do with you." That night I went to Thomas and told him I was transferring out. Couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop seeing those stone circles, those tall figures in the periphery of my vision, those children with empty eyes speaking with ancient voices. Thomas just nodded. "Most don't last longer than you did. I'm surprised you made it 3 months." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "Before you go, there's something you should know. Something I haven't told anyone." He pulled out a folder from a locked drawer in his desk. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, taken throughout Shawnee over the past 30 years. They all showed the same thing: tall, thin figures standing among the trees. In some photos, they were barely visible, just suggestions of shapes and shadow. In others, they were clear enough to see that they weren't human, not even close. Their proportions were wrong, their limbs too long, their heads too large and too empty of features. But the worst photos were the ones Thomas had taken in the past year. The figures were closer to the trails now, closer to the campgrounds. Some were clearly visible from established paths, standing between trees in broad daylight. And in the most recent photo, dated 2 weeks earlier, one was standing at the edge of the parking lot at the Garden of the Gods Visitor Center. In the background of the image, I could see tourists walking past, completely unaware of the thing standing 15 feet away, watching them. "It's crossing over," Thomas said quietly. "Whatever barrier existed, whatever agreement kept them west of the divide, it's breaking down. In another year, maybe 2, there won't be any safe zones in Shawnee. They'll be everywhere, and then we'll have to decide whether to close the forest or to just stop warning people and let nature take its course." I looked at the photos spread across the desk. "What do they want?" Thomas shrugged. "Same thing any ancient intelligence wants when faced with an invasive species: their territory back, their dominion restored, us gone, or changed, or absorbed. David's probably still alive out there somewhere, in whatever passes for alive for something that exists outside our conventional understanding. Maybe part of him is conscious. Maybe part of him knows what he's become. I hope not. I really hope not." I transferred out of Shawnee 2 weeks later. Took a position in the Ozarks, nice safe forest with normal problems, droughts and invasive species, and the occasional meth lab. I sleep better now. Most nights. But I still have the dreams. Dreams of walking through Shawnee at night, following singing voices. Dreams of standing in circles of ancient stone while something examines me with an intelligence that predates human consciousness. Dreams of trees that aren't trees, and the faces pressed against their bark from the inside, still aware, still screaming silently. And I still get calls from Thomas every few months, updates on the situation. The divide keeps shrinking. The incidents keep increasing. The figures are everywhere now, visible even in daylight. The Park Service is trying to keep it quiet, threatening rangers who talk with termination, burying reports, explaining away disappearances with natural causes and animal attacks. Last week, Thomas called me at 2 in the morning. His voice was hollow, defeated. "They're in the eastern sections now," he said. "Crossed the divide completely. I saw one standing outside the main ranger station yesterday morning. It was looking at the building, looking at me through the window. And I swear, Crescent, I swear it looked familiar. I think it was David. I think my partner has been trying to come back for 26 years, and now he finally can. Now whatever he's become can finally cross over." There was a long silence. Then Thomas said, "I'm filing my retirement next week. 33 years is enough. Let someone else document this. Let someone else maintain the illusion that we understand what's happening here." But we both knew the truth. There wouldn't be anyone else. The other rangers would transfer out or quit, or worse, stop seeing, stop noticing, stop documenting. They'd convince themselves that Shawnee was normal, that the incidents were explicable, that the figures in the trees were tricks of light and shadow. And the old ones would reclaim their territory, inch by inch, tree by tree, until the western section wasn't separate anymore. Until it was all western section, until Shawnee National Forest became what it had been 1,000 years ago. A place where something ancient and patient held dominion, and humans were only tolerated as long as they stayed on the paths and didn't look too closely and didn't ask too many questions. I am Crescent Henry Ashford Raveneye, and I've escorted 3 separate families out of the Badlands after their children started speaking in perfect unison, describing things that happened here in 1873. The children never remembered anything afterward. I remember everything. And I'm telling you, if you're planning to visit Shawnee National Forest, stay east of the divide. Stay on marked trails. Don't investigate unusual sounds or singing voices. Don't examine stone circles or ancient mounds. Don't go into caves, no matter how curious you are. Because the old ones are patient. They've been here longer than our species has existed. They'll be here long after we're gone. And they remember every person who crosses their boundaries, who disturbs their territory. who looks too closely at things they weren't meant to see. They remember. They're always watching, and they're deciding, case by case, person by person, what to do with us. Thomas was right about one thing. The children speak first. The young ones see what we've trained ourselves not to see. If you're hiking in Shawnee and you encounter a family whose children are speaking in perfect unison, describing events from a century ago in impossible detail, get them out. Get them east of the divide. Get them home. But know this, they've been marked now, measured, documented, and sooner or later, the old ones will call them back. Will call all of us back. Because in the end, the forest always reclaims what was taken from it. The divide is getting smaller every day. Soon there will be nowhere safe to stand. Nowhere the old rules don't apply. Nowhere we can pretend to be the dominant species. I sleep with the lights on now. I keep detailed journals of my dreams. I've started seeing figures in the trees here in the Ozarks too, though I haven't told anyone. Maybe they followed me. Maybe they're everywhere, and I just couldn't see them before Shawnee opened my eyes. Or maybe, worst of all, there is no divide anymore. Maybe there never really was one. Maybe we've been walking through their territory all along, tourists in a land we never understood, tolerated only as long as we were useful or interesting or too ignorant to see the truth. The old ones are patient. They've waited this long. They can wait a little longer, but not much longer. Not much longer at all. This is Chris and Henry Ashford Raveneye, former ranger at Shawnee National Forest. Stay east of the divide while you still can. Stay on the trails. Stay in the light. And if you hear children singing in perfect unison, describing things they couldn't possibly know, run. Run east. Run toward whatever boundaries still hold, because the old ones are crossing over. And when they finish crossing, when they finally reclaim what was always theirs, there will be nowhere left to run at all.